Yan Yunfang was a young doctor who liked to play pranks on his patients. Not surprisingly, an elderly patient complained about the chili pepper in his hemorrhoid cream. The young man immediately realized that the shouting of the irritated patient would not lead to anything good, and ran away from him with all his legs. When he reached the high fence, he swung over it with his tightly packed backpack on his back and sympathized with the old man. It was high enough to the ground, so the guy's landing raised a huge column of dust. As he continued to scurry away, the doctor shouted that the crushed cold fruit was useful in treating his condition. Other than that, Yan Yunfang didn't know when he would go back and apologize for exterminating the adult film collection at the same time. The young man ran faster and faster. He needed to gain acceleration. The young man ran faster and faster. He needed to gain momentum. Jumping down from the high cliff, the boy smiled and shouted to the old man that he should take better care of his health. After landing on the roof of the train, Yan Yunfang tucked his backpack under his head and dozed off with a twig in his mouth with a smile. He remembered that as a child he had gone to the mountain with an old man to study medicine. Later he went on missions all over the world. That day, a man mercilessly kicked him with his foot from the highest point of Moyun Mountain. The young man shouted that he would come back anyway. His assignments varied. He could go to a magic mountain on a moonlit night and steal medical ingredients along with the underwear of bathing girls, or go on a crazy journey through the Amazon jungle as a mercenary, turning around at every rustle. Quite often the doctor was out on business trips in the Pacific Ocean, fishing for outlandish underwater creatures. Pensive, the young man straightened to his full height and remembered that he had always been responsible for completing tasks. As soon as the boy remembered that today's mission was to find a bride, he hit the back of his head on the bridge slab and went tumbling. Flying past the carriage with a huge bump on his head, Yan Yunfang burst into tears due to the intense pain and declared that he was already on his way to fulfill his duty. The guy didn't quite understand how a charming bride could end up in one of the filthy compartments of this train. Suddenly he heard some strange sounds and listened. A girl with a pleasant voice complained that she was in a lot of pain. The doctor wondered to whom such a wonderful voice could belong and why she was complaining of severe pain. His turbulent male fantasy drew him a heated train conductress in uniform with her white blouse unbuttoned. Yan Yunfang cheerfully exclaimed that he had already arrived and sprinted down to the window where he heard a mysterious female voice. During the flight, the guy gaped a little and caught his feet on the windowsill. He flew headfirst into the compartment. The young man quickly got up from the floor and felt his bruised chin, blushing. He hoped no one had seen his embarrassing fall. Suddenly he saw a stunning beauty in seductive blue shorts. The guy realized that he had landed successfully. The boy's body trembled with excitement. He thought that after the mountains he would never see the girls again, and now he was as if in a dream. Yan Yunfang walked closer to the girl. As a real doctor, he simply couldn't pass by and must examine the patient. He knelt down by Tianxiang's sleeping place and quietly tried to wake up the sleeping beauty. The young man appreciated the girl's wide cleavage with satisfaction. He did everything according to the instructions. Examining a patient is very important for a doctor. Yan Yunfang moved on to diagnose the patient's legs. They were ajar under the sheet. The guy could look at them. After examining the legs, the doctor gave his verdict. The girl is definitely ill. Her face was pale and her limbs weak. Qiang rolled over from her side to her back and changed the position of her legs. The young man recognized the examination as completed. This cute girl made his heart beat harder. His circulatory system couldn't take it and blood rushed through his nose. Beautiful Qiang, meanwhile, simply couldn't find a place for herself and was constantly tossing and turning. Yan Yunfang took a closer look at the girl's symptoms and decided that she was suffering from severe lower abdominal pain. Meanwhile, the passenger had rolled over onto her back again. The girl was very hot. She was suffocating. Barely opening one eye, Tianxiang quietly asked to call the conductor. She was unable to do so herself. The doctor readily volunteered to help her. The girl was so beautiful that the young man could not help but blush when he was near her. He barely talked himself into turning away from the passenger and not staring at her so blatantly, it was uncultured. Suddenly, Yan Yunfang saw an empty cup and a popsicle stick on the table. Now everything was clear to him. The patient's dysmenorrhea was aggravated by the fact that she was lightly dressed in cold weather, and at the same time ate a portion of ice cream. The doctor smiled lustfully and rubbed his hands together in anticipation of pleasure. This treatment should be interesting. He told the girl that she was very lucky. It was in her compartment that a doctor with brilliant skills happened to be there. He rushed over to Tianxiang and ripped off her sheet in one fell swoop. The young man couldn't take his eyes off her smoothly heaving breasts. The doctor tried to concentrate as much as possible on the deep diagnosis and closed his eyes, mentally channeling the energy. After a few seconds, the young man's eyes opened. His body had already accumulated enough qi energy. By accumulating in different parts of the body, the energy formed point formations of qi that could be used for medicinal purposes. The unfortunate girl kept moaning, holding her stomach. She could not even open her eyes because of the intense pain. From medicinal practice, the young man knew that dysmenorrhea was caused by poor circulation of qi energy and weak blood circulation of the body. Qiang's knees were trembling from the intense tension. The young man went down to his shins and decided that a little qi should ease the patient's pain. The guy felt her feet and checked the qi entry points. The girl was sweating and moaning. She had a fever due to her ailment. The doctor pulled both of the girl's feet toward him. Blushing at the pleasant touch, he said cheerfully as he began his course of treatment. Yan Yunfeng pressed both of Qiang's feet at the same time, infusing enough qi energy into them. Because of the strange feeling that arose in her body, the patient involuntarily grabbed the sheet and clenched it in her fist. What she felt now made her open her clear blue eyes and blush very hard, disregarding the pain. It was very much like a strong surge of energy, as if she was swimming naked in the depths of the ocean. The feeling was very strange. The energy was not pressing down on her at all. The girl had a feeling of peacefulness. She was still suffering from pain in her lower abdomen, but things were different now. Qiang felt that the pain was gradually going away. Finally, the unpleasant feeling disappeared completely. The girl sighed with satisfaction. It felt good to be able to breathe calmly at last. Her present condition allowed her to lie as she pleased. The beautiful passenger turned on her side toward the table. The patient was getting better and was able to open her eyes fully and look around the compartment carefully. Suddenly, the girl realized that an unfamiliar guy was sitting across from her, who was pleasurably kneading her feet. At first, the blue-eyed beauty thought that she was just imagining it after the malaise, but the strange feeling did not disappear. Qiang's terrified scream flew out through the open window of the compartment and echoed throughout the nearby mountains and forests. Throwing a sheet over her body, she indignantly kicked the doctor in the face and angrily told him that he was allowing himself too much. The young man tried to explain that he had helped her out of her pain. A man hovered down from the top shelf and shouted that they were disturbing people's sleep. A man and a woman from the top shelves watched interestedly as a guy kneeled by a girl on the bottom shelf. The bald-headed gentleman with the small mustache was afraid to admit to himself that he even understood the situation correctly. He liked his neighbor's large breasts from downstairs and her pumped-up buttocks. He liked the guy who was clearly no good. A man leaned out of the compartment and started calling for help. He shouted that a hooligan was harassing a girl in broad daylight. Walking along the corridor of the carriage, Li Yan suddenly heard calls for help from his compartment. Apparently, someone had attacked his Qiang. The boy smiled and adjusted his glasses. He had waited too long, but his hour had come. He would finally be able to show himself a hero. Bursting into the compartment, the young man saw the stranger and angrily demanded that he immediately remove his hands from the girl. Yan Yanfang smiled and advised the passenger to press the body points he showed next time. This is ordinary acupuncture. Qiang was no longer angry. She understood what had happened and apologized for her behavior. She had simply misjudged his actions. Her acquaintance continued to hold the young man. The girl indignantly demanded to let him go. He is a doctor and helped her a lot. Li Yang shouted that it was all nonsense. Dysmenorrhea is not cured by acupuncture. As a medical university student, he knows this and brought pills. The doctor replied in a calm voice that the student was too young, so he could not accuse him of ignorance. Yan Yanfang straightened up to his full height and said that he perfectly understood the reason for his anger. He had just broken his devious plan. Li Yan shrieked fearfully. He was not afraid of the young man at all, especially since a nobleman solves matters with words, not force. At the same second, the boy felt his opponent's tenacious hand grab his arm. This made him even more frightened. After throwing the guy over himself and slamming his face into the floor, the doctor informed him that he had not positioned himself as an honorable man. From behind the open door, there were gawkers watching the fight. Yan Yanfang assumed that the ice cream was given to the girl by Li Yan. Qiang was genuinely surprised. She sat on the bottom shelf and inquired how the young man was able to find out. The doctor explained that the guy set it all up and decided to arrive a hero with a life-saving pill. The pathetic student applies medical skills for the sake of an ungenerous goal. The girl only now realized what kind of monster she'd been around all this time. Almost crying, she asked Li Yang if the doctor was telling the truth. The boy screamed that it was all a lie. He'd never in his life been able to calculate her cycle with such stunning accuracy. Yan Yanfang smiled and reminded that he was a medical university student, so such concepts were definitely familiar to him. He said he'd better go and read a couple of medical books so as not to embarrass his university. It was clear to the audience. They knew that this student treated the girl well, and that guy was just bullying him. They all started murmuring in unison that the guy was a quack. His methods are invalid. We should call a real doctor. The man hangs off the shelf and declares that the guy was wrong. They agree to forget the whole thing if he pleads guilty. Yan Yanfang could no longer tolerate ignorance and people who couldn't understand the simplest things. He demanded that everyone shut up. He cried out that once a man saw a foot massage, he suspected lust, yet he himself has a yin deficiency. The man hunkered down from the top shelf in horror. For years he'd managed to keep it a secret, and the guy found out in a minute. Jumping down from the top shelf, he pleadingly asked the young man how he knew this, and inquired if the doctor could restore potency. Now the man called the guy a big brother as a sign of respect. He was ready to give any money for the treatment of his illness. Yan Yanfang remembered the old man, and clapped the man on the shoulders. He said that his master could get rid of illnesses in one fell swoop. The matter could be considered solved. The gawkers quickly changed their point of view, interrupting each other. Each of them now recognized the great doctor. Li Yang couldn't believe that things had turned out this way. The crowd of people in the compartment almost crushed him to death. People from all over the train seemed to have come here. Each of them had some kind of chronic illness, and only now could the pain be relieved. Yan Yanfang explained through a megaphone how to find his teacher, and the crowd dispersed, leaving him with 100 yuan and a kiss on his cheek as a memento. When the dust cloud cleared, the young man saw that his opponent Li Yang was still lying on the floor. His entire body was covered in shoe marks. Qiang was now looking at the young man with completely different eyes. Just a little more, she would fall in love with this top-notch doctor. The doctor remembered the old man. If he's still on the mountain, he's obviously surprised by the multitude of sick people. It could be considered payment for his tuition. The protagonist arrived at the East Railway Station of Xiangjiang City. The girl decided to say goodbye to her new acquaintance as quickly as possible. She gave him a note. Yang excitedly read the note. Lu Qianxiang wrote her phone number to him and indicated that she was studying at medical university. The girlfriend was running through the train station. The main character happily thought to himself that she didn't like him. The lad proudly told himself that in 2 decades of living in the mountains, he had not lost his charm. The protagonist looked around. He realized he needed to check into some hotel. A man he didn't know came over. He asked the boy if he wanted to stay at his hotel. Ian waved a disgruntled hand at the stranger and said he was busy and had other things to do. The man told the guy that his hotel had something interesting to offer. Afterward, the stranger told the startled hero that his inn had many great jeweled swords. Ian was very excited. He went along with his new acquaintance. The man told the boy that he had about 10,000 swords at his disposal. After the protagonist and the man arrived at the hotel, he was very disappointed. The man showed the guy a set of cheap souvenir swords that were allowed on the wall. The main character was very disappointed. He went into his room and collapsed on the bed. Jan, lying on the bed, thought that the innkeeper had cheated him out of money. The main character was lying down and looking at the wall of the room. He decided that he was tired and could sleep. The guy watched the water drip rhythmically from the faucet in the wash basin. The dripping water became more and more hypnotizing. The guy felt as if the drops had become huge. In the next instant, the protagonist found himself in a reality completely unfamiliar to him. He was standing in water. Ian looked around carefully. He couldn't figure out where he was. The protagonist noticed as he stood in front of the doors of a vast and mythical palace. Ian decided to grab the huge ring on the door. He decided to go inside and look around. The doors opened and the boy saw before him a huge, swanky palace. Yang realized that he was in the temple of Yao Wang. It belonged to the medicine kings. Then the protagonist decided to go inside the temple he started to climb. The protagonist climbed the steps with interest. He was curious about what was inside the temple. Ian opened the door to a large room. There was no one around. A few statues stood near the opposite wall. Jan looked at the huge statue. He wondered how many meters high it was. The protagonist looked at the statue and said to himself that to him everything around looked a little familiar. Guy walked over to the foot of the statue. He wistfully thought he might have been here before. Suddenly something struck and frightened the guy. He heard a great noise. The building began to shake and rocks started falling from the ceiling. Yang was very excited. The boy looked at the statue. He cried out frightened. He was very frightened. Yang noticed the stone dragon began to glow menacingly. He realized that the dragon had come to life. The protagonist was startled to see the dragon across from him with burning eyes. The guy quietly said hello to the monster and decided to turn around and run away. After that, the protagonist turned around and ran away from the monster with all his might. Ian ran as fast as he could. He wanted to get away from the dragon as fast as possible. The guy ran and yelled, very scared to the dragon not to eat him. Yang shouted loudly to the monster that its meat was tough and unpalatable. The main character was very frightened. He ran away from the dragon and shouted loudly. After this guy went into a parallel reality. It's like he was in a magical space. The main character was like sitting in a little water. He didn't realize what had just happened to him. Yang saw a small magic orb in front of him. He reached out his hand to touch it. The protagonist excitedly reached out his hand to touch the mysterious ball. Suddenly, the orb burst apart and glowed with bright colors. Yang was frightened and covered his face with his hand. The protagonist decided to himself that he was seeing the purple celestial glow of the universe. After that, the boy woke up from his vision. He jumped up sharply on the bed. The main character was very surprised. He was remembering and thinking about what had happened. Ian looked at his hand. There was a small broken balloon. He had picked it up on the way down the mountain. After that, he had strange visions. The protagonist clenched the magic ball in his fist. He wondered what the heavenly glow of the universe was all about. Ian turned around and started to walk away. He decided he would deal with all of this later. The guy walked towards the exit of the room. He decided that today was the big day, and he had to meet his fiancée. There were a lot of people outside the huge Shinhai International building. A girl walked into the corporate building. The secretaries at the entrance greeted her and called her director. The girl's name was Gu Ruochu. The secretary told the lady that the manager was waiting for her. Gu went to the manager's office door and knocked. The manager told the guest to come in. The guest saw that there was a huge amount of papers on the table in front of the manager. She asked Xingshu how she had time to read the reports. Gu put the file folder on the table and told her interlocutor that her fiancé was in town. The manageress turned around and told the girl who had passed that there was no need to worry. Xingshu told the interviewer that a couple of days ago, her grandfather had personally taken charge of the marriage matter. After that, the girl stood up and said that her fiancé was a young master of the Yang family. Gu looked at the manageress and decided that this girl was very seductive. After that, Gu looked angrily at the manageress and said that Xingshu is the beautiful girl of the Yi family. After which the girl shouted to her interlocutor that she was totally unworthy of the guy from the mountain. The girl replied that marriage was a lifelong choice, but her grandfather had already decided everything. Gu said excitedly to her interlocutor that she could help her dissolve this marriage. The manageress took the cup with her drink and told her friend that she needed to think for a bit. She said angrily to her interlocutor that it might be that someone more worthy would come now. She asked if the manager dared to disobey her grandfather's decision. After which the girl continued to say something very angrily to her interlocutor. Gu smiled slyly and said she had a couple ideas for a really bad way to play with someone. The manageress smiled at her guest and said she was leaving everything to her. The main character was sitting on a bench near the entrance to the building. There were people walking around. Yang thought to himself that the Shanghai building was not far away and could be reached on foot. He looked around and noticed that he had 20 yuan left in his wallet. At that time, a car appeared in the street. It was going at full speed. There was a little girl standing in the road. The main character looked away and got worried. He realized that the car might hit the girl. After which the guy abruptly jumped from his seat and ran to the girl's aid. The guy got there just in time. He grabbed the girl and tossed her aside. The car braked sharply, skidded sideways and hit the truck. After the cars collided, there was a loud explosion. The guy carried the girl to the side at that time. There were people running around. Someone got the passenger of the car and asked for help. A man was sitting next to an unconscious girl. He was screaming for Lin to wake up. The driver was very frightened. He stood by the girl's body and shouted that everything happened because of his poor driving skills. The main character came over. He said the ambulance would be here in half an hour. It would be too late to take the girl to the hospital by then. The guy angrily grabbed the protagonist by his clothes and said that if Lin died, he would bury him with her. Ian replied calmly to his interlocutor that the girl's injuries were serious. He knows how to help her. The guy angrily asked the protagonist, "Is he really that doctor?" He asked for Yang to help the girl. As a reward, he promised fame and fortune. The main character calmly replied to the guy to keep quiet, and he would try to save the girl. Ian then walked over to the lying girl. He examined her carefully. The protagonist took the lying stranger's hand. He felt her pulse. Ian listened carefully to the girl's breathing. He said she would die without a skull fracture. The guy standing next to him got angry and asked the protagonist, "Does he really want to cut open a girl's skull here?" The protagonist told the guy very grudgingly to be quiet. Yang continued to make attempts to revive the girl. A nearby driver excitedly said that he didn't want Lin to die. The guy was sharpening a huge knife. He told his interlocutor that if Lin's girlfriend died, he would stab him. The protagonist looked at the patient and realized that he needed to use his true ki. After that, Ian reached out his hands to the girl's head and touched it with his fingers. The protagonist closed his eyes and sank deep into a meditative state. The guy was in astral reality right next to the girl. Yang realized that the patient could stay alive by using her inner ki. This means that she has started on the path of self-cultivation. The protagonist realized that this feeling was completely different from the one he once had. Yang continued to make attempts to heal the girl. He used the skill Purple Breath of Life. The protagonist looked at the girl and thought that using true ki to treat illness could help develop self-cultivation. Yang directed the true chi energy in the girl's body to the right organ. The protagonist ordered his patient back to consciousness. The guy with the knife threatened the main character that if he didn't cure Lin, he would stab him. Suddenly, the unconscious passenger started to come to her senses. She wanted to say something. Yang told people that there may be some consequences because of the treatment, which are not really important. The protagonist told himself that after he cured the girl, he would leave here as an unknown noble genius. Passers-by were very surprised that the stranger was able to cure serious wounds. Someone shouted that the main character was a divine doctor. Lee Girl felt the qi energy in her body blazing very strongly. The girl Lin remembered how 3 years ago she was on a secret mission on the Amazon. She was exposed and she had to run away from the chase. When the girl was in the jungle, suddenly a huge predatory monster appeared next to her. Soldiers ran up to the girl, and she felt that she was utterly desperate. The soldier gave me an evil look and said, "Asian girls are really hot." Suddenly, the warrior heard some kind of dangerous noise. He looked away in fright. A huge green monster with burning eyes stopped next to the girl. The monster stopped and looked at the people standing next to him with angry eyes. The monster's mouth opened and a guy came out. He asked the soldiers cheerfully, "Have they had enough of life?" The main character was standing in the mouth of a huge monster. He was bored. The girl realized that the stranger had been in the jaws of a huge crocodile the whole time. Lin asked the boy fearfully, "Who is he and why is he hiding here?" Ian thought to himself that he was seeing a beautiful woman. Out loud, he told his interlocutor that he was ranked #1 in the world among mercenaries. He added that his call sign was Blood King of Unicorns, and he was here for a serious assignment. Now the Lin girl, after waking up, remembered how she met the protagonist before. The driver and his companion were overjoyed because Lin was finally awake. The girl struck her companions with her hands and shouted that they were clumsy drivers. She asked him where the stranger who had just rescued her had gone. He noticed that the protagonist had disappeared. The girl angrily shouted to the guys to immediately find the man eating spas. The protagonist arrived at the corporation building. He went inside and approached the administrators. Yang told the receptionist that he walked to her as he needed to meet with her manager, Yi Xing-shu. The girl Gu was standing nearby. She turned to the protagonist and told him to follow her. The guy thought his bride-to-be was walking in front of him. He noted that the girl had a cold personality. The protagonist and his companion left the building and went somewhere in the direction of the building. Jan was walking behind his new acquaintance. They were walking up the stairs together. The companion informed the protagonist that they had already arrived at the location. A guy and a girl went into an abandoned building. There was no one there. Gu told the interlocutor that he would live here. She added that Xing-shu was busy right now and the guy would talk to her when she was free. Ian thanked his companion. He said the place was spacious and he liked it. The girl didn't know what the guy was talking about. She thought he was pretending to be satisfied with everything. Suddenly, a huge black spider came down from the ceiling. Gu was really scared. The girl was startled by the spider and bounced sharply aside. Yang did not understand what had happened to his companion. The main character picked up the girl and asked if she was okay. The main character was holding a frightened girl in his arms. He told her she saw a small spider. The interviewee got angry at the guy and called him a very vicious pervert. Ian grabbed the girl's arm just in time. He reminded her that he had saved her and she wanted to hold on now. Gu got even more angry. She demanded that the protagonist let her go immediately. The girl turned around and started to walk away. She shouted that men don't have an ounce of dignity. The guy reached out to a small spider sitting on a metal rail. The protagonist told the surprised spider not to bump into the evil girl in the future. An upset Gu was walking down the street. She thought that the protagonist had made her leave and she hadn't had time to tell him about the hospital. The protagonist arrived at the entrance of the public Xinhai hospital. Yang remembered the girl who had told him to go work at the Xinhai hospital. She added that their company would not tolerate slackers. The boy said to himself cheerfully that this little community hospital would be the beginning in his becoming a legendary doctor. The protagonist ended up working at the hospital as a janitor. The boss made the guy clean the floors and restrooms. Jan had to clean up trash all over the hospital. The protagonist listened to every instruction from his superiors. He decided to endure everything for the sake of the ultimate goal. Suddenly, a patient was brought into the hospital. The paramedics rolled him on a stretcher down the corridor. The nurse shouted that they had a patient with angina pectoris. His life was in danger. The nurse shouted that they should call Dr. Su. The protagonist got distracted. He realized there was a patient he could help. Ian threw off his janitor's clothes and shouted happily that he had medical skills and wouldn't waste his talent. After that, the guy pulled out his healing food and said he was getting down to business. The protagonist ran into the patient's room and Dr. Su was already there. The nurses were happy because they saw Dr. Su. Everyone was waiting for him to help the patient. The doctor asked about the patient's family members. He added that all medical expenses would have to be paid. The nurse said the ambulance was called by a passerby, so they haven't contacted the family. Dr. Su told the nurse sternly that they have a private hospital and he can't save people for free. The protagonist stood among the other people in the room. He looked at Dr. Su carefully. A doctor angrily told a nurse that he would cure a patient if she would pay for it. The nurse said fearfully that the patient might die. The doctor said that he would not treat Naklebnikov for free. Dr. Su was very amused by the words of the nurse who said the patient was going to die. The doctor then walked over to the gurney and flipped it over with a strong kick of his foot. A sick old man fell off the gurney onto the floor. He couldn't get up on his own. The doctor cheerfully said that poverty alone was a disease that could not be cured. He added that the poverty patient would die sooner or later. The medic ordered his subordinates to throw the sick old man out into the street. Protagonist walked up to the orderlies and demanded that they let the old man go. The orderly asked the guy who he was. Ian activated his special skills and the medics fell unconscious from his touch. Dr. Su was very surprised. He looked away unhappily to see who was interrupting him just now. The protagonist approached an old man lying down. He noted that the patient's pulse was disturbed. Jan realized that the patient was suffering from variability of angina pectoris. The nurse was surprised that a stranger gave an accurate diagnosis to the patient with only one glance. Ian put a needle in a sick old man. He needed to inject near the heart at the cardiac point. The doctor asked the guy why he, as a janitor, thought he was the divine doctor. Ian thought he needed to save the man. Applying the needles would require very slow movements and steadiness. The doctor angrily yelled that the protagonist was ignoring him. He threatened that the guy would cripple the patient. Then the doctor swung his leg and prepared to strike the protagonist. Dr. Su practically kicked the protagonist in the head with his foot. Ian raised his arm just in time and stopped the doctor's blow in front of him with his needle. The doctor was very much surprised. He saw that his shoe was beginning to disintegrate. A needle had been stuck in his foot. After that, doctor started bloating really badly. He got huge as his insides swelled up. The doctor frightenedly asked the guy, what did he do to him? At that time, the main character told the nurse that the old man's disease would not manifest itself again. The patient would soon recover. The bloated doctor shouted threateningly at Jan that his uncle is the director of the hospital and the head of Group E. The protagonist turned around and started to walk away. He told the lying doctor that he could only rely on himself now. Dr. Su put his arm around the guy's leg and demanded that he fix him first. The chief sternly told the medic to use the money to pay for his treatment. The doctor got very angry. He realized he had no way out and had to pay. The doctor knelt on the floor. He decided to agree to the protagonist's terms. The doctor held out a card to the protagonist and said there were 5 million on it. Yang would get it if he cured him. People were surprised at the doctor's behavior. They could not understand how he could have so much money on his card. Yang became very angry. He angrily thought that when he recovered, he would put all the subordinates in a humiliating position. The protagonist asked the medic, did he really think that if you have a lot of money, it's great? Ian told the doctor that he had collected a lot of money and forgot about the Hippocratic Oath. The protagonist then took the doctor's card. He demanded that the patient turn around to him. Yang was pointing out to the frightened and agitated doctor how to stand properly in front of him. The protagonist told the patient that a stagnation of qi energy was found inside his body. The guy explained to the patient that he would only recover after a good crotch stimulation. Then the protagonist kicked the doctor's ass with all his might. He flew off to the side. The doctor fell to the ground from the strong blow. He was in pain and could not get up. Yang told the patient that the treatment was over, and he would make a full recovery in 2 days. Dr. Su angrily asked the guy how dare he hit him. Yang replied, the man would be better in 2 days. The doctor lunged at the guy with a knife and demanded that he fix him as soon as possible. The protagonist turned around and swung the medic with all his might. The hospital staff watched in amazement as the doctor was knocked aside after a strong blow. Ian said angrily that the medic was an irredeemable fool and had brought death upon himself. The protagonist then threw the card to the nurse. He said that he was donating the money to the Red Cross. The director of the hospital was accompanied by a guy named Li Ju. He added that his father was brought in with angina pectoris. The principal told the guy that his nephew named Su Meije is a good doctor and will cure the guy's father. Young guest was surprised to open the door to the chamber and see his father there. The guy would have been really startled. He felt like he'd seen a nuclear explosion. My father sat quietly at the table and played cards with the other patients. He was completely healthy. The guy excitedly asked the old man if he was okay. The patient replied that he had been treated and was feeling better. The director cheerfully said that the old man could be helped by his nephew. He asked the lad Li Ju to have Shanghai Hospital placed in the top 3. The head nurse told the guy that she too wanted their hospital to be recognized as the best. Afterwards, the nurse said she'd tell the truth so she wouldn't feel guilty. The woman opened the door to the room and showed Dr. Su lying there. She shouted to the guy that this doctor had abandoned his old man to his fate. The patient was rescued by a doctor with the last name Yang. The principal told the guy fearfully that his band E was big and respected in town. Li Ju replied angrily to the interlocutor that he didn't care at all what band he was in. The guy yells goodbye to the hotel manager, that if the hospital isn't going to save people, it should be shut down sooner rather than later. He said excitedly to his father that he knew about the hospital. The old man replied, Only Dr. Su in the hospital is a problem. The boy thought to himself that the excellent Dr. Yang was very much interested in him. The girls were in the Shinhai International Building. Gu asked her interlocutor Sing Shu if she had heard about the case at the hospital. The hospital manager replied that she was aware of the case. Dr. Su Meija was dismissed from the hospital. Ding Su, the hospital manager, was also punished. The former hospital director was transferred to the department, where he started working as a janitor. Gu reported that the rating of Shinhai Hospital is in critical condition. Sing suggested holding a charity event in a couple of days and inviting Li Ju. The manageress hesitated and said she would apologize to the guy in person. Gu thought that if Xing knew that the old man in the hospital was saved by the main character, she would look at him differently. It's evening and the main character decided to relax after work. Guy got a refreshment at a modest restaurant called Chew and Swallow. Ian remembered the old man telling him that he would come down the mountain for a while and meet him. The main character remembered that he hadn't prepared anything for his bride. He decided to prepare a talisman for her. Ian tossed the empty jar aside and decided to go look for a gift on Antique Street. The Antique Street was lively. There were a lot of people walking around. Suddenly the protagonist felt some excitement. He looked carefully to the side. Jan saw many merchants and customers around him. He decided that he had come to this place for nothing. A salesman appeared with a snuff box in his hand. He shouted to the people to stand aside and not to interfere with his business. After which the man angrily shouted at the protagonist to get out of here. Yang moved from his seat very quickly and disappeared lightning fast to the side. The salesman suddenly dropped the snuff box and it began to fall down. The man fell to the ground. The snuff box fell beside him. The people around him were surprised. The salesman woke up. He shouted to the protagonist that he had broken a good snuff box because of him. The man angrily shouted at the guy for hitting him. He added that his snuff box was worth 5 million. The interlocutor angrily demanded of the guy that he compensate him for the damage. Jan replied that he didn't want to bother today. The guy handed the salesman a bill. He said that the snuff box was fake and that it was worth no more than $100. The salesman shouted angrily that his snuff box was made of rare wood and was the real thing. The people around them were not happy. Someone told the seller Juan that his snuff box looked new and was a fake. Juan shouted to the protagonist to stand there and not go anywhere. He promised to come back, at which time some man from outside called out to the protagonist. The stranger asked the guy, did he really just use the fastest martial technique called flying crane gate? Ian greeted the stranger in return and said he was completely right. The man looked at the guy with interest. He decided that the protagonist was the successor to Mo Yuan. He decided to befriend him. The man offered the protagonist to go with him. He promised that the guy would choose his own gift and would not pay anything. After that, the main character walked down the street with a stranger. They passed by stores. Yang figured the old man would offer him something good. He hoped he would get the jade products and not have to pay. At this time, the seller Juan woke up. He was surprised to see a huge number of pigs around him. The seller was very much surprised and frightened. The piglets were running around him, and he did not understand what was happening. After that, the car in the back of which Juan was sitting drove off with the pigs. The car was driving away, and some guy I didn't know came up behind me. He was watching closely. The guy contacted his uncle. He reported that the garbage had been disposed of. An hour later, the protagonist, along with his new male acquaintance and another guy, entered the premises. Yang said shyly that the older E overestimates him a lot. The man replied to the protagonist that he would give him a piece of emerald. The guy was holding an emerald under glass. The man said he was very reluctant to part with the stone. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a suspicious noise from the side, as if something was flying. Ian shouted fearfully to his companion to be careful. A large bat flew from the side. The main character caught it just in time. Ian turned to the side and saw the stranger. He asked cheerfully, why is he throwing around such dangerous things? The stranger was huge. He had a bat on his shoulders. He shouted cheerfully that his hand had just slipped. The bandit said angrily that the protagonist had broken an expensive item that belonged to his brother. The people around them got scared and started to disperse and hide in the stores. They were getting ready for a huge massacre. The man menacingly shouted to his subordinate to wait. Yang asked the thug, did he come to avenge his brother who hid the fake snuff box here? The thug angrily asked the guy, where did his brother go? The protagonist replied that the seller Juan spends his time in the company of fat pigs. The bully shouted to the protagonist that he was going to teach him a lesson. Then the thug swung the bat and swung it at the guy with all his might. The big guy hit the ground with a thud. There were dents all around. Yang told his rival that he would cure him of his chronic anger. The bandit swung the bat again to hit the protagonist. He couldn't hit him. The protagonist has activated a special magical skill for his defense. The guy swung around and very quickly knocked the big guy in the chest with his left hand. After the blow, the big guy was thrown to the side. He stayed on his feet. Bandit shouted to his opponent that he had very weak punches like a girl's. Ian responded to a formidable opponent that as a doctor, he should not mince words when he is called soft-spoken. Ian angrily told the thug that he hates people who call him soft. After that, the protagonist abruptly pushed himself off the ground and jumped high up. The protagonist swung his hand at the big man's face. He had no time to defend himself. The big guy got hit hard. He didn't have time to attack the protagonist with the bat. After that, Qiang very quickly struck the bandit with his hands to deliver several staggering blows. He swung the bat and shouted for the protagonist to stop hitting him. Qiang managed to bounce back. The bandit menacingly told the guy that his muscles are harder than stone. His opponent's blows are like a tickle to him. Qiang was very much surprised by such a response from the bandit. At this time, the big man felt something in his body. The thug started to feel something inside him after the blows. He started to lose his strength. Big bright lightning bolts started coming out of the big guy's body in all directions. The bandit's body very quickly and completely desiccated. He shouted that his muscles were gone. The bandit fell to the ground. He had no strength at all. The main character came up to him. The big guy was very surprised. He didn't understand how it could be that he was missing all his power. Qiang explained to his opponent that he had removed places of compacted connective tissue in his body. The guy sat down and told the thug that after the therapy his body would never gain huge muscles again. The man would have been surprised. He noticed that the protagonist had stripped the bandit of his muscles without damaging his bones. The protagonist asked cheerfully to the male Itai, where were they during their conversation? The man held the necklace in his hands. He told the protagonist that he wanted to be his friend. The guy frighteningly said that Itai is holding the family religion. The man told the protagonist that he has worn this jade pendant for years. He wants to give it to Qiang. At this time, someone came out of a trash box and watched the protagonist and the male Itai Zu closely. After that, the stranger decided that he had to report everything to his boss as soon as possible. He started walking away. The main character accepted the gift. He told the man Itai that he could always count on his help. After that, the guy turned around and started to walk away. He looked after Qiang and said that he would be a dragon and a phoenix among men in the future. The man turned around and started to walk away with his companion. He said grudgingly that his son-in-law somehow couldn't be like Yang Yunfan. The protagonist returned to his room in the employee dormitory in the evening. Qiang sat at the table and examined the gift. He realized that the jade pendant could be used to make a talisman. The guy held the gift in his hands. He remembered that Itai had told him that this jade was a family religion. The protagonist said cheerfully to himself that the man himself had decided to give him the jade. Ian decided that the matter was urgent. The pendant flew up and floated in the air. The guy decided to start recycling, at which time the punk ran up to the door where the guards were standing. He asked the bodyguards, "Is the boss inside?" Punk then ran into the room and yelled to the boss that there was an unpleasant situation. The boss sat quietly at his desk and smoked a cigar. He asked his subordinate what he wanted. The ringleader's name was Qiang. He was sitting surrounded by girls. He reminded his subordinate that he was to move to him after he found the protagonist. Punk slumped to the floor in fright. He yelled that Iron Man had been defeated and humiliated by a stranger right on the street. He yelled for revenge. The bandit showed his ringleader the portrait of the guy he'd drawn. The ringleader said he felt like blowing off steam now and would help his subordinates. Punk told the leader that the last time he blew off steam, his victim turned into a kite. After which the leader and his subordinates arrived at the student dormitory. Punk told the ringleader that he followed the guy and he stopped here. The ringleader said they needed to go in. The ringleader kicked the door to the room. He yelled for the guy to take his punishment of death. The bandit saw a young student wearing girls' clothes who was broadcasting on video. He was thanking someone for a donation. A student dressed as a girl told someone in the audience that black silk stockings would be best for him. The bandits were very outraged and frightened by what they saw. They threw up. Punk told his ringleader that he was a little mistaken. He added that the main character should be in the next room. After which the bandits went to the next door and kicked it down with all their might. Guests noticed a guy sitting in a chair watching a computer broadcast of a student in women's clothing from the next room. The ringleader was very much surprised and amazed. He decided to turn to the guy, at which time the student in the chair felt as if he had opened a bottle of champagne. The frightened and agitated subordinate turned to his boss. After which the ringleader ran into the room, lunged at the student and began beating him. The boss was beating up a guy lying on the floor and yelling at him to only look at 2D girls. A student in women's clothing at the end of the broadcast told his viewers that he loved them all. The bandits threw up again. The leader crouched down and said fearfully, his eyes bulging. Protagonist woke up the next morning. The sun was shining in his room. Qiang said to himself that the symbols he had drawn on the talisman corresponded to the shell of a turtle. They symbolized superior protection. He also offset this with the fire sword symbols. The main character looked at the pendant and said that it blended perfectly with the fire sword and turtle shell. He decided to use this talisman to protect the girl Xingshu. The door to the protagonist's room opened. One of the bandits said Yang was good and hid from them, but they were even better now. The protagonist replied that he wasn't hiding. He was here the whole time. The punk shouted angrily at the guy to wait for the moment of his death. The ringleader came running into the room. He said that he would kill the protagonist because he had suffered inhuman torture last night and lost an eye. The protagonist pulled out a magic talisman. He told the intruders that he would get rid of weeds like them. The guy told the thuggy bandits that he would first torture them to death and then taste their flesh. The ringleader swung his cleaver. He shouted to the guy that he had the strength to kill him. He prepared to hit the protagonist. At this time, the guy activated his skill and repelled the bandit's attack very quickly. The ringleader dropped his weapon. It fell to the side. Yang continued to stand still. After that, suddenly the clothes on the bandit began to dissolve and fall off. The ringleader asked, surprised at the guy, "Is he really the doctor the Lin girl is looking for?" The ringleader was glad he'd met a wonderful doctor. He told him the whole story. After a while, the protagonist, accompanied by his companions, arrived at the bar. The ringleader opened the door and told the protagonist that the Lin girl was waiting for him further inside. The guy was alone in the bar. There was silence all around. He asked, "Is anyone there?" Jan told the invisible interlocutor that he didn't need money from her. At that time, someone tapped him on the shoulder from behind. The protagonist turned around and saw a strange girl. He got worried. After that, the girl walked up to the protagonist and put her arms around him. The companion told the unicorn that she didn't call him here for money. After that, the girl smiled very slyly and romantically at the protagonist. The conversationalist told the cheerful protagonist that she could repay him with her body. The conversationalist put the guy's hand on her breast and told him he could do whatever he wanted to her. The protagonist looked at the girl with a very excited and agitated look. Ian grabbed the person he was talking to and wondered if she had accidentally mistaken him for someone else. The girl smiled. She thought to herself that the main character had said it himself. The companion grabbed the guy and said she wasn't wrong and they could continue. Suddenly, the protagonist grabbed the stranger and gently placed her on the floor. The protagonist lay looking at the girl with great suspicion and distrust. The interviewee looked fearfully at the protagonist and asked, "What is he doing?" Ian stood up and told the stranger that she had a very good seduction technique. The guy asked her acquaintance, "Who is she and how did she know his alias?" The girl asked excitedly to the unicorn, had he completely forgotten her? The interviewee reminded the guy that he had rescued her from black people in the Amazon forest a couple years ago. The protagonist remembered the person he was talking to. He called her by the name of Honshu Lin. The girl smiled at her interlocutor and said she was glad he recognized her. She asked, would he leave her on the cold floor? The protagonist cheerfully told his new acquaintance that he would help her. Ian apologized and held out his hand to the girl to help her up. The interlocutor held out her hand. The protagonist helped her up. Afterward, the acquaintance abruptly advanced toward the lad and embraced him. The girl told the surprised unicorn that after their breakup on Amazon, she thought she wouldn't see him. She added that she really missed the main character. The girlfriend told the surprised interlocutor that she had only come to Sanjiang because it was a place he had once mentioned to her. Honshu told the guy she loved him and had been waiting 3 years to meet him. The protagonist was very much taken aback. He excitedly called his girlfriend by name. An acquaintance moved in on a guy. She asked him to kiss her. Jan kissed his girlfriend. At that time, some guy ran in and said that he had brought some bottles of red wine for Lin. The guy got scared and agitated. He told the people at the bar that he didn't see anything and they could go on. The girl turned around and shouted angrily at her guest to get the hell out of here. The guest started to leave. He shouted goodbye to his interlocutor to take security measures. Honshu said grudgingly as the guy who showed up ruined everything at the last moment. The protagonist thought to himself happily that the unexpected guest had saved him. The girl turned around and told the unicorn cheerfully to forget about what had happened. She offered to continue. Honshu hugged the person she was talking to. Afterward, the main character shoved the girl away and said he already had a fiancée. The girl was very much amazed. Honshu couldn't believe that the guy already had a girlfriend. The protagonist consumed the drink from a glass. He remembered that his old man's vodka was much better. The protagonist set his glass down on the table and noticed the incoming message on his phone. The girl told the unicorn that tonight at 6 p.m. she'd be at the banquet. He would have to be her boyfriend. Ian tossed the phone to his girlfriend and asked what kind of banquet she was referring to. Girl read a message on her phone about a banquet at the Xinhai International Hotel at 6 o'clock in the evening. The girlfriend explained to the guy that the banquet had been organized by the eldest daughter of the Yi family. The friend asked the guy, "Is that girl his fiancée?" The main character said that his fiancée was hiding and avoiding him for some reason. My girlfriend said there's going to be a lot of young talent from all over town at the banquet. The companion hugged the guy and said that she would help him realize his fiancée was unworthy of her unicorn. In the evening, the protagonist arrived at the hotel building in an expensive car with his girlfriend. The main character got out of the car first and opened the door for the girlfriend. The companion was sitting in the automobile. John said cheerfully to his acquaintance that they had already arrived. The guy looked at his beautiful companion and said she could get out of the car now. The girl said dreamily to the unicorn that she really liked that his figure was more solid than it had been 3 years ago. Ian told the girl excitedly that he was singing along with her since she had asked him to. The companion said she would help the protagonist to get his fiancé's attention. Suddenly, a group of people appeared from the side. One of them called out to the protagonist. The guy told the protagonist angrily that you can't take street hookers to decent banquets. The stranger angrily said that the protagonist is a savage from the mountains. That is why a prostitute from the street suits him. Honshu told her friend that the vile semblance of a man stood before them. The protagonist replied to his girlfriend not to get angry. He added that they will not stoop to the level of the cattleman in front of them. The stranger angrily asked the protagonist, who did he call a bastard? The other guy said Miss E invited the wild main character to announce publicly that she was marrying him. The stranger took another look at the protagonist and said he would humiliate him during the banquet. The girl angrily told the unicorn that she wanted to teach the bullies who had insulted them a lesson. The guy replied to his companion that there was no need to pay attention to stupid cattle. The stranger looked at the protagonist angrily and with great hatred. The protagonist turned his foot sideways to knock the stranger to the ground. Yang kicked the guy's leg and shouted for Xiao Chen to be careful. A sudden jolt knocked the guy to the ground. He was very angry. Xiao Chen jumped up and shouted that he would kill the protagonist if he touched him again. Yang replied calmly to his interlocutor that he wouldn't do that again. After that, Xiao Chen decided to go up the elevator with his companions. The guy got into the elevator with his friends and said he would send them to the 233rd floor. The guy said that redneck Yang Yunfang dared to bet with Xiao Cheng for the hand of Miss E-girl. Suddenly, the guy felt a strong stench begin to emanate from Xiao Chen. The guy shouted angrily to his friend, "Is there a fart in here and it stinks really bad?" The guys felt really bad. They even tried plugging their noses so they wouldn't hear the stench. The elevator was going up very slowly. The indicator light showed every floor passed. The guy noticed they were only on the 4th floor. He wanted to be rescued. The guys gasped. They saw that the elevator was still only on the 5th floor. The passengers were getting worse and worse. The indicator light showed the elevator was on the 6th floor. The stench in the elevator was so strong that all its passengers fainted. Eventually, the elevator arrived at the 233rd floor. As a result, the passengers were finally able to get off. Honshu asked the protagonist what he did, though. Yang replied to his companion that he only used a few tricks. The protagonist noticed that Xiao had a dark yellow face and pale lips. It showed an upset stomach and spleen. Yang struck his opponent in the center of the vulnerable point. It facilitated the release of gastrointestinal gases. The protagonist hit his opponent in time and deftly, and he went down. Honshu said cheerfully to her companion that he was bad. The protagonist replied that he was a doctor and didn't hurt people. At that time, Honshu noticed 2 unfamiliar girls walking towards them. They were getting closer. The girl reached out her hand to her companion. She wanted to say something to him. Honshu hugged the guy. She said she wasn't feeling well. She asked him to check her pulse. The girlfriend looked at the protagonist very excitedly. He couldn't refuse her. The protagonist said very excitedly and cheerfully to his companion that there was nothing wrong with her pulse. A girl named Yixing Shu came over. She greeted the protagonist and asked him to introduce his girlfriend. The main character, together with the girls, went up to the banquet hall on the top floor. There was a party going on. Ian saw a huge and appetizing crab lying on the banquet table. After that, the guy picked up a bunch of food and carried it to his desk. He looked very hungry. Yang gorged himself with mountains of food. He shouted that it was the most delicious food he'd ever tasted. Honshu said that the boy could eat more if it tasted good. Gu told her companion Xingxiu that the protagonist was not brought up at all. The other guests watched in amazement as the guy consumed the food. A friend asked Xingxiu why she always carries a jade pendant with her. The girl replied that it was her grandfather's pendant. Xingxiu couldn't understand how her grandfather's pendant could be in the hands of the protagonist. Shortly before, the main character introduced his bride to his girlfriend named Honshu Lin. Honshu took the guy's hand. She told the girl Xingxiu that she spent the whole day with the main character and came to the charity auction. She told the interviewer that she didn't want to leave the guy on his own. He's her partner for the evening. Honshu snuggled up to the guy and told her companions to ignore them. Gu grudgingly said that Yang had arrived in the city a couple days ago and had already gotten close to a rich married woman. The girls looked at each other with hatred. Gu angrily said that it was the first time she saw Miss Lin in front of her. Yang became even more agitated. Honshu angrily replies to her interlocutor that she doesn't have a boyfriend at all because of her obnoxious character. After that, the girls threw themselves at each other with hatred. The protagonist became very worried. Suddenly came Xingxiu's voice. He shouted to the girls, "You need to stop!" Xingxiu told her interlocutors that she didn't pay attention to insignificant little things. Honshu told the unicorn to act like he didn't know the girls in front of him. She added that his fiancée was very angry. The guy told his girlfriend what he needed to say to his fiancée, just a few words. The protagonist told the bride that he came to the banquet because the engagement was the will of his parents. Ian told the interviewee that he was obliged to respect his parents' demands. Xingshu was surprised by the main character's words. She realized that Yang Yunfeng was not the same as Ruochu had described him. The main character threw his girlfriend an amulet. He said it was a gift in honor of their first meeting. Gu told her friend that it was her grandfather's jade pendant. Xingshu was very surprised. The girl scrutinized the talisman. She suspected something. After looking at the jade pendant, Gu decided to tell her friend something very important. The girl said in a confident voice that the main character had stolen this jade pendant. Gu explained that Yang stole the pendant and decided to give it to his fiancée. Xingshu couldn't believe that her fiancé was such a bad person. The announcer said that the auction was starting. He said that there was a stone in good preservation in Zone A. The presenter said the most valuable stone was valued at $1 million, after which the presenter reported that other stones had worse preservation. The auctioneer said the price of other stones ranged from $300,000 to $10,000. The presenter added that all proceeds from the auction will go to material aid for children in the mountainous regions. The announcer announced the start of the auction. Hanshu told her friend that the stones were of very good quality. The protagonist asked slyly to his girlfriend, does she really want to make his fiancé jealous? Hanshu told her companion to play along or she would eat him. Yang felt pleased. The main character was very excited. After a short pause, he decided to turn to his girlfriend. Yang told his companion that he would pick out a natural stone for her. Hanshu replied that the stone would not make any difference to her. Suddenly some people approached. The stranger said slyly that he could smell the stench. Yang turned around and saw Xiao's boyfriend walk up to them. He said he smelled something in here. The protagonist told his opponent that he didn't smell anything, but Xiao smelled a mile away. Angry Xiao shouted he poured many bottles of perfume on himself and started to smell nice. Yang covered his companion and said it's acid rain. The excited Xiao suggested that the protagonist play a game with him called cutting a stone at random. The protagonist became agitated and was surprised that his interlocutor offered him a wager. Xiao told his rival that if he lost, he would disappear from his eyes forever. Otherwise, the protagonist would have to break off his engagement to A Yingshu. The girl Gu said to herself cheerfully, inviting Xiao Chen was the right decision. Yang Yunfeng would have to break the engagement. The protagonist proudly and cheerfully told his opponent that he was accepting his wager. Yang told his companion that they would see each other at the auction, where the stones are located. Xiao Chen was very excited. He was happy because of the main character accepting his bet. Xiao laughed angrily. He shouted that he would make his opponent kneel in front of the Xingshu girl. Xiao angrily chuckled. He remembered that he had personally replaced the natural stone. Therefore, the protagonist would not be able to win. Hongshu tells the guy that she wants him to break off the engagement and belong to her. At the same time, she doesn't want Yang to lose to the arrogant Xiaocheng. At this time, the protagonist was examining the stone very carefully. He told his girlfriend to be sure. Yang and he told his companion that he was not afraid of anything about playing with the stone. Hanshu asked the protagonist, doesn't he understand the desires of her heart? There was a group of guys running around. Some were shouting that the main character would lose, and the eldest daughter of the E family would have to get married a second time. The girl abruptly stopped the guy and asked, why is this Xingshu going to get married for the second time? The guy said that the main character and Xiao Chen are going to play a game. The winner will get the right to marry Miss E. Gu told her friend Xingshu that the protagonist decided to put her as a bet in a dispute. Xingshu told her friend to follow her. She added that they would also watch what was going on. The auctioneer cut a huge stone on a table. A crowd of spectators watched. The people were very much amazed. They were frozen by the green color of the stone in front of them. The man looked at the stone and said that the emerald green color was very similar to the imperial emerald jade. The expert told the audience that this stone was as clear as water and was an emerald of the highest quality. Somebody shouted that Xiao Chen had hit him right in the soul. Xiao angrily told his rival that he was waiting for him to try to make up in front of him with strength. Xiao Chen, in a burst of emotion, grabbed a piece of clothing and ripped it off. Xiao was covering pieces from his clothes. He had a very colorful tattoo on his arm. Xiao then shouted to his opponent to listen to him and admit defeat. A rival shouted at the protagonist that he should resign himself to living the rest of his life with Xingshu, in whose eyes he would be dishonored. The people around laughed evilly. Everyone shouted that Xiao Feng was the best at cutting natural stones and only he was worthy of the Yi Xingshu girl. The protagonist calmly told his interlocutors that they were a herd of stupid pigs. Ian was up on stage. He told the audience that they were very mentally retarded. The protagonist asked the craftsman near the table to start cutting the natural stone. Gu told her companion that the protagonist was very stupid. He chose a natural stone from Zone D. Xingshu replied that her grandfather had taught her since childhood that you can't make conclusions until the last minute. Gu thought to herself that Xingshu is protecting and supporting the protagonist at tonight's event. The guy raised a huge circular saw to the rock and started cutting it. The master watched the process carefully. He said that the result would be a piece of red jade. The spectators laughed. Someone shouted that the red jade could not surpass the imperial jade in any way. The protagonist told the foreman to keep cutting. The man shouted fearfully as he listened to the sound of the golden jade. The saw cut through the rock. A very bright yellow color came out of it. Then a huge yellow dragon sprang out of the stone and flew upwards. The yellow dragon soared upwards over the audience. Everyone was very amazed. Xiao Chen was very much frightened and worried. He shouted that such a jade could not be here. After that, the guy ran to the Master Yi, shouted that he wanted to make sure the jade was authentic. The man was very much frightened when he saw a spectator running at him. The foreman plopped down on the table and accidentally hit the power saw switch with his hand. Suddenly, the circular saw flew out of the case and flew upward. The saw began to fall from the top down. There was a girl standing there. She was scared. The spectators were very much frightened. Xiao Chen frightenedly called out to his familiar girlfriend. The main character saw that his girlfriend was in danger. He decided he wasn't going to let her die that way. The protagonist snapped out of his seat and rushed sharply to his girlfriend's aid. He jumped up. With a very powerful blow, the guy knocked the metal saw aside and it flew far away. Then Jan descended gently to the ground and approached his bride. The main character reached out and asked Missy if she was okay. He said he accidentally broke the wall. The girl very excitedly replied to the protagonist that she was fine. Suddenly, the Jiu girl showed up. She ran to her friend and asked if she was all right. Gu shouted that it was very fast and dangerous. She added that her girlfriend was saved by the main character. The protagonist thought that he hadn't expected that the Gu Rozu girl had such a tender and sensitive side. Yang said angrily to Xiao Cheng that his naive attempt had failed. Xiao explained that he only wanted to check the quality of the stone, and the saw had accidentally fallen out. The guy said that now nothing more could be cut out of the stone, and that the dragon was just for show. The protagonist looked angrily at his interlocutor and asked, "Doesn't he believe it?" Then the guy slammed his hand down hard on the rock. It shattered. Suddenly, a bright and yellow glow appeared from the stone. From there, a yellow dragon flew out. A dragon flew through the roof of a building at the top of a skyscraper. All the people saw it and were amazed. Someone said he could see red jade in the dragon's pupil. Another spectator was not sure if the main character's stone could outdo Xiao Chen's stone in price. Yang asked the master to value the jades in money. The man replied that red jade would be worth at least 200 million. Xiao Chen ran up to the old man and demanded that he admit that his stone was better. At that time, the main character came over. He reached out his hand and grabbed Xiao Chen. After that, the protagonist struck his opponent with a swinging kick. Xiao flew sideways. The protagonist sternly told his opponent that he could not accept defeat with dignity. The guy angrily yelled at the protagonist for being a bastard. He was still lying on the pile of rocks. The protagonist told his rival that he had previously ordered his men to perform a dirty trick. Yang stuck a magic needle into the head of one of Xiao Chen's underlings. The guy talked about the cancellation of the natural stone from Area A and the green-colored imperial jade that had been prepared in advance. The audience became very indignant. They realized that Xiao Chen's boyfriend was a fraud. He himself tried to justify himself. After that, Xiao felt very bad. He was mortified by his defeat. Xiao Chen's body began to shake in a very violent fit. He could no longer stand. The guy ran up to his friend and asked what had happened to him. He was lying unconscious. The girl asked for a doctor to be called for Xiao. The protagonist cheerfully said that no European doctor could help his rival. He added that he could cure Xiao's disorder. The guy dropped to his knees and said that if the protagonist cured their young master, they would fulfill all his demands. Ian walked over and looked at the guy lying there. He said angrily that he would fix him. The main character walked up to a guy and suddenly pulled down his pants. The guy asked the divine doctor in surprise what was he doing. After that, the protagonist took the guy and planted his butt on the face of the lying Xiao Chen. Xiao was very frightened, but he could do nothing and his comrade sat on top of him. The guy plopped his butt on his terrified friend's face. After that, Xiao Chen seemed to burst. Blood spurted out of his mouth. The people around them were frightened. They thought the boy was already dead. They could not believe that a young master could die such a horrible death. The man told the girls that the protagonist was not a doctor and had made things worse. He added that medical help was needed for Xiao Chen. The protagonist thought about it and realized that Xiao Chen might have been personally invited by the girl A Xing Shu. Yang said his patient spurted blood out of his mouth. The guy needs some rest. A friend came to Xiao Cheng and said excitedly that the young master was feeling better. The people around him were surprised that such a cure had worked. The protagonist told his companion that he was very much disappointed with the auction. After that, the guy went to his girlfriend Han Shulin and said they were leaving together. Xing Shui excitedly shouted to the main character to wait for her. Xing Shu offered to buy the protagonist's red jade for 200 million if he cut it. Gu told her girlfriend that even if the main character saved her, she shouldn't pay him that kind of money. Ian turned to his girlfriend and thanked her for reminding him. The protagonist took the stone in his hands and told the surprised interlocutor that it was not for sale. The protagonist activated a magic skill in his hand. He decided to use it on a rock. The guy put his hand on the rock. A very bright glow went off in all directions. The light from the rock stopped getting brighter and brighter. Suddenly, a very beautiful necklace with a red ruby appeared from the stone. The girl stared mesmerized at the stone. She found it beautiful on the jewelry. Ian told his girlfriend that he and promised a gift, and he hopes she likes the stone. The girl was very amazed. She was very happy that the guy had given her such an expensive stone. The girls were very much amazed that the protagonist gave the girlfriend a stone for 200 million. The girl shouted angrily to herself that she admired and hated, as the elevator rose to the 233rd floor. It brought 2 passengers inside. A guy came out of the elevator with a girl. They were looking for someone. The girl asked the companion, "Is Yang really the fiancé of the president of the E group?" The girl asked, "Why does the protagonist work as a janitor in a hospital?" Li Ju's boyfriend replied to his companion that she was asking a lot of questions. He asked her not to ask him any more questions. The girl didn't like her companion's answer and angrily called him a slut. She greeted Li Ju's boyfriend and his companion. Sing Su bowed to the guy and apologized for what happened to his father. Lu Ju explained to his interlocutor that he went through to personally thank Dr. Yang. The girl was very surprised. Sing Su couldn't believe that the main character had saved Lu Ju's father. 10 minutes later, the girl said angrily to the guy that she had been preparing for a long time to see Yang Yunfan, and he was gone. Lu Ju shouted to the girlfriend that the main character was a married man. The companion cheerfully said that the guy had not yet consummated the marriage. She added that she wanted to see the protagonist with her own eyes. The boyfriend replied that he would take his father to the Shinhai hospital next week for a second checkup. Gu went over to his girlfriend and asked if she was still angry. Xing Su replied that she was not angry. She could not figure out what kind of person Yang Yunfang really was. At this time, the girl received a message from her grandfather. She read it carefully. The girl read that her grandfather required her to marry within the next week. Gu said excitedly to her girlfriend Xing Shu that they can make the protagonist give up the marriage contract in a different way. Xing Shui hesitated and answered her interlocutor with a rochu so Ta wouldn't worry. Afterward, the girl said that she might not be worthy of Yan. The protagonist was in town at the time. A guy and his girlfriend were having a drink at a bar. After a short pause, Yang called out to his acquaintance Han Shu. Protagonist asked the girl why she still hadn't said anything after they got back. Han Shu held out a glass to her interlocutor. She said she would tell him everything after he drank it. The boy didn't resist. He agreed to the girl's entreaties and drank the contents of the glass. Han Shu looked at the unicorn carefully. She had something important to say. The girl told her companion that after he gave her the necklace, she felt joy. At the same time, Han Shu realized that the protagonist belonged to her. Yang replied excitedly to the girlfriend that she was scaring him. Suddenly, the protagonist felt very intoxicated. Everything swam before his eyes. The protagonist looked at the wine glass. He realized that something had been added to the drink. Ian asked his girlfriend apprehensively, what did she want to do to him now? Hanshu replied to the guy that she lied to him. 3 years ago, she ran away because she didn't want to do a mission in the organization. At that time, she already wanted to find Yan. The girl told her friend that she had some business to attend to. After that, she would go back to his place. Hanshu began to take off her dress a little. She told her interlocutor that it did not belong to her. The conversationalist told the guy in a romantic voice that tonight she belonged only to him. The protagonist excitedly said the name of the Hanshu girl and fell into a deep oblivion. Suddenly, the protagonist woke up and saw a huge number of guys coming in front of him. They were happy that he woke up. Jan was very much annoyed and frightened. The people around him were amused and surprised. The main character asked the guests how they got here and what about the girl Hanshu Lin. The guy said that the girl left and asked not to look for her. She also transferred all assets to Jan's name. Ian got very excited about this news. He felt that he needed to find a girl. The main character was very worried about his girlfriend Hanshu. He had to see her. Ian commanded the leader to send men to find the girl. The leader replied that he would do so. The main character ran to find his girlfriend. He told himself that Hanshu Lin was very stupid. At the time, the girls were sitting in the corporate building. They were in the office. Gu was very excited. She told her friend Xing Xiu to look at the big news. Xing Xiu was sitting on the couch. She asked her friend again, "What's the news?" The media reported that a guy at the airport brought a huge banner to find a sweetheart. There were also pictures with the main character in the news. Xing asked her interlocutor Ruozu, how could this news possibly apply to her? The girl was watching a video on her tablet where the protagonist called his lover Hong Shuling. Then Xing Shu pressed her finger on the screen and it cracked. Xing Shu cheerfully told her interlocutor that the tablet was of low quality and cracked from the slightest press. Ruozu reminded her girlfriend that her grandfather told her to get married within a week. The protagonist has other lovers. They can take advantage of this and dissolve the marriage contract. Xing Shu walked to the office window. She told her interlocutor that she was not going to upset the marriage contract. The manager said that she had heard her grandfather's story that her parents and Yang Yunfan's parents had once been very good friends. The protagonist's parents died. Their last wish was that their son and Xing Shu could get married. After that, the manager said that she was entitled to inherit most of the shares of the E Group. The manageress explicitly said that if the protagonist marries her, she will enforce the prenuptial agreement. Xing Shu held out a document to her colleague Ruochu. She said, "This is an invitation to Yang Yunfang Yu's position." The superintendent said that she is waiting for John tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning at the entrance of the civil administration office. A sad guy was walking down the street. He couldn't figure out where his Honshu girlfriend had gone. Suddenly, the guy heard some suspicious noise in the bushes. He stopped. The protagonist took a closer look. He saw someone lying in the bushes. Yang looked into the bushes and saw a girl lying there. He thought it was a Honshu. The protagonist looked at the stranger carefully. He couldn't tell if he saw his girlfriend in front of him. 10 years ago, an old man sent the young protagonist on a mission to Mount Shushan. The boy was walking near the mountain with a bag in his hands. Yang was distracted while climbing a mountain and was bitten by a strange animal. It was a white snake. The boy was very frightened. He ran and tried to throw the snake off him. Ian waved his arms and legs and shouted loudly for the snake to get away from him. The boy galloped around and didn't notice as he tumbled down the cliff below. The main character fell from a very high height. There was a forest where he fell. At that time, a girl was walking through the forest. She was carrying some kind of backpack. She was collecting medicinal herbs in it. The main character fell on a tree branch and then fell in front of a stranger. The girl was very frightened of the stranger. At first, she even wanted to run away. Ian thanked the interviewer for treating his wound. He asked the girl what her name was. The stranger smiled at the guy and said cheerfully that her name was Xiazin. The protagonist watched and noticed with surprise that he now saw Xiazin lying in the bushes. He could not understand how she could have been here. Ian looked at the girl lying there carefully. He noticed that she looked very bad. Young decided that inside the Xing was one of the most dangerous poisons in the world. The girl could have been poisoned by the poison of the golden silkworm. If a person is not healed in time after such poisoning, the blood vessels in his body will burst. Yang decided to help his old acquaintance. The protagonist took Xin to the old Xinhai dormitory. He put her in the lotus posture in the center of the room. Yang looked at his patient with excitement. He decided to heal her with the elements of the different elements. It would help neutralize the poison. After that, the guy went into deep thought. He realized that he needed to help the girl as soon as possible. The protagonist wondered what would happen next. He was in deep meditation with his eyes closed. Then the guy came up behind her and unbuttoned the girl's clothes. Suddenly, after being touched by the protagonist, Xin began to come to her senses. She opened her eyes. Yang thought excitedly to himself that the silkworm venom was beginning to shift. The guy pleaded with his girlfriend and told her to take it easy. He decided to treat her for sure. At that time, someone from the street started approaching the main character's house. It was late evening. The girl slowly walked up the stairs toward the protagonist's apartment. Gu thought angrily that the guy didn't have any contact info, so she had to come to this neck of the woods. The guest walked to the door. She saw a mysterious green glow spreading around. The girl looked inside with interest. She couldn't understand what was going on inside Yang Yunfan's apartment. The protagonist and his patient were sitting in the center of the room with their arms around each other. Everything was in green light. The boy and his girlfriend Xin were in a state of deep meditation. A disgruntled guest Gu angrily shouted at the protagonist that he was a male dog. The main character woke up. He turned around and yelled to the girl not to come in here. Around the guy and his patient, a green glow continued to spread in waves around them. A green glow touched the girl who had come and threw her far aside. The Gu girl with a loud scream flew away frightened. Ian looked at his girlfriend. He yelled excitedly that it was really bad. At this time, the girl was being carried far away by the green glow. She was in a frightened state. The protagonist realized there was no time to waste. He accelerated and ran to help his girlfriend. Ian reached out sharply to grab the girl. She was pulled farther and farther away. Then the protagonist threw the Gu away with all his might, and it flew back into the room. At which time the surprised guy saw someone fly up to his balcony from the street. Jan was very surprised. Some girl came down on the balcony railing in front of him. The protagonist realized that his girlfriend Xin was standing in front of him. She said cheerfully to the interlocutor that they had not seen each other for a long time. Ian said excitedly to the girl that she looked bad and asked if she was okay. After that, Xin approached the surprised protagonist and kissed him. The guy was amazed. He realized that the girl was healed and full of strength. The girl slid her hands through to get the barrette out of her hair. She told the protagonist that she hadn't expected to meet him in this town. Soon pulled a piece of jewelry out of her hair. She told the guy that she had an assignment now. The girl informed the interlocutor in an important voice that she was leaving him the stiletto. Soon told the guy in parting that if she survived, she would come back to get the hairpin. The main character got scared. The girl jumped backwards and flew down. Ian yelled to his girlfriend to wait. The girl flew far away in the meantime. That's when Gu came to her senses. She asked the protagonist unhappily, what just happened? The girl noticed that the guy was talking to himself. Yang felt sad that Zin had just walked out on him. Gu angrily shouted to the interlocutor that first he had fun with Honshu and now for himself found some zing. Ian walked sadly to his room. The girl yelled that as long as she didn't care who he was flirting with, and dating. The main character closed the door. The girl was annoyed. She wanted to tell him something. Gu shouted to the guy that tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, Eishing Shiyu will be waiting for him at the Civil Affairs Bureau. The protagonist collapsed tiredly on the bed. He thought about the incident with the Zin girl. Yang told himself that his girlfriends Hongshu and Zin had secret missions but didn't say a word to him. They didn't even ask him for help. The boy told himself cheerfully that he would not leave things like that. Ian shouted to the girls in a confident voice that he would find them at all costs, at which time suddenly his bed fell under the guy. He was very unpleasantly surprised. The next morning, the protagonist was waiting for his girlfriends, Xingxiu and Gu Ruochu. The girl looked at her watch. She couldn't understand why the protagonist hadn't arrived yet. Xingxiu proposed to her girlfriend to come back. Gu replied excitedly that they have the opportunity to persuade Yan to cooperate and eventually then cancel the engagement. Xingxiu said thoughtfully that for the protagonist, even a $200 million piece of jewelry has value. She asked her girlfriend, how will they talk him into it? The main character showed up. He heard the girls talking and told them they could just talk him down. Yang looked at his girlfriend Xingxiu with a smile and said that he agreed to the deal. The girlfriend looked at the guy excitedly and with interest and asked, what kind of deal is he offering? Gu grudgingly asked the protagonist, what trick did he come up with this time? Jan looked at the interviewee and said that the two of them don't want to get married. That said, there are reasons why they should get married. The main character walked up to his girlfriend and put his hand on the wall beside her. Yang told the excited Sobranjaya that she should help him find two people through her family connections. In return, he promised that he would be faithful and spend a lifetime with Xingxiu. After thinking for a bit, the girl replied to the guy that she could try to help him. The girlfriend then replied to the interlocutor that she had a few conditions. The girl told the interlocutor that he would not interfere with Shinhai's business after the wedding. The girl added that the protagonist would move into her house after the wedding. Ian replied to his girlfriend that he agreed to her terms, but only he had objections. The protagonist told his girlfriend that marriage is a private matter, and he doesn't want outsiders disturbing their family life after the wedding. Gu angrily shouted to the guy that he shouldn't go too far. At that time, she put her hand on Xingxiu's shoulder. Xingxiu told her girlfriend Ruochu that after they move out with the main character, she won't accompany him anymore. Xingxiu said excitedly that the guy won't do anything wrong to her. Yang told the interviewer that she is his wife and they can enter the building together. The girl got very excited because the guy called her wife. She clutched her clothes because of her excitement. Ian asked his girlfriend to wear more modest clothes after they officially became husband and wife. Xingxiu. With a smile, she told the guy that she understood everything. She told the guy that tomorrow he would work as a medical consultant in the hospital. Girl Gu told the main character angrily that if he bullied Xingxiu, she would take him out in the trunk of a car. Then the doors closed and both girls sped off in the car. At this time, the final preparations for the arrival of the protagonist were underway at the house of Yi Xingsu. The ringleader commanded his subordinates to be careful not to break their new boss Yang's belongings. The protagonist was in the house and gazed in amazement at his new acquaintances. The ringleader told the guy that he had enlisted the help of the Yi family to find his girlfriend Lin. Yang smilingly replied to his interlocutor that he'd better not say that he'd seen him here. He thought to himself that it would be better to hide the fact that he was married to Xingxiu from others. The protagonist was sitting in the reception area. Next to him on the desk was a pile of documents and a girl sitting there. The lawyer handed the guy the will his father had left when he was alive, after which the girl showed the guy on the table the doctor's credentials and qualifications. The guy got, according to the will, 1/10 of the shares of Group E. The main character's father wrote him a simple letter. John read it and thought it might be very specific. The protagonist reads the letter. His father tells him about the great benefits of marrying the girl. The lawyer was very surprised. The main character, after reading the letter excitedly, turned aside. The protagonist sat in a state of meditation. He thought that he would soon go to the second floor of Yin Qi. The guy thought to himself that his acquaintances Hongshu and Zun have a lot of problems, so he should quickly go to the second floor and help them. The main character knew that after he broke through to the second floor, he would form a golden virtue body. The guy opened his eyes abruptly and demanded of the heavenly forces to give him a smash right now. The protagonist saw as if he were in front of a huge golden column. The protagonist reached out a finger and touched the golden artifact. Then a force lifted the guy up and carried him far upward. He was floating in space. Yang concentratedly cultivated the golden body of virtue within himself. The protagonist continued to sit in a state of deep meditation. He saw flashes of fire all around him. He decided that the more people he cured, the more spiritual energy he would receive. For him, the breakthrough to the second floor was at hand. The guy suddenly heard some noise from the street. He came to his senses immediately. Yang turned around excitedly. He thought he heard the voice of his girlfriend, Shu. The boy was startled to realize that the voice was coming from the yard. He jumped up and ran. Ian was very much amazed and surprised when he saw his girlfriend. The protagonist decided that a dead man's soul had invaded his girlfriend's body. The guy noticed that Shu was in a semi-fainting state. He called out to her fearfully. The main character grabbed his girlfriend in his arms. He was very excited. The guy walked slowly inside the parallel magical reality. He decided that forming a body of virtues could attract all the souls of the deceased. The main character held his girlfriend in his arms. He said that with this information he would be able to exorcise the dead man's soul from Shu's body. Yang could not believe that the blood of an ancient bloodline could flow in Shu's body. The main character remembered that he could quickly increase his cultivation with a single drop of blood essence. Ian told himself that right now he had to take his mind off extraneous thoughts and save his girlfriend. The main character pulled back the clothes on the girl's body. He was looking for the right spot. Ian took the needle with great care and caution. He had to stick it into a special point below the navel. After the guy stuck the needle in, the process of disintegrating the unfavorable dark soul began. The girl opened her eyes. She saw before her a mysterious and unreal floral world. Shu lay down and felt as if she was lying on the green grass in a meadow in a fairy tale reality. The girl was amazed. She said to herself that everything around her was very beautiful. The girl turned around and was surprised to see her familiar Yang Yunfang sleeping next to her. Shu angrily tapped her friend and angrily asked why on earth was he sleeping next to her. Jan explained to his wife that she fainted in the yard. He saved her, and so he accidentally fell asleep next to her. The girl asked her friend in surprise, did he really save her? Ian replied that he did. Shu remembered that her head started to spin after she entered the courtyard. Then a feeling of complete misunderstanding hit her. The girl had something gurgling in her stomach. Jan replied to her friend that he had cured her completely. Young asked her friend, doesn't she have any food in the house? Shu replied to her friend that she had sent the maid on an indefinite vacation. The protagonist cheerfully told his friend that he would cook some food for her. The girl asked her friend, can he really cook? Ian told her, he's a chef. She's having a divine dinner tonight. A guy roasted a chicken over a fire. He told his girlfriend that the chicken was very skinny. The meat ended up being very overcooked. Jan confidently slid the food to his girlfriend. Sing, disappointed, asked the guy, does he really call himself a chef? She added that the chicken looks like charcoal. Ian smiled at his girlfriend and said he forgot the very last touch. Guy walked over to the roasted chicken and started doing something with it. After that, the main character brought the food to the girl and said that the golden fried chicken was ready. He offered to taste the food together. Shu looked at the food in her hands with excitement. She decided that the chicken was starting to look much better now. The girl slowly and carefully carried the food to her mouth. She decided to try the chicken. The girl liked the food very much. She said it was delicious. Suddenly, there was the sound of a helicopter flying overhead. The boy and the girl looked up and saw that a ladder was coming down. Shu was very much surprised and amazed by the appearance of the helicopter. A young guy in a white suit came down the stairs from the helicopter, and the acquaintance told the girl that he had specially flown from the capital of Country X to see her. The guy in the white hat told the interviewer that she was having fun with her man right out in the open. Shu recognized the guy. She called him by his name Shui Minyu. The girl asked her interlocutor, isn't he afraid of invading another country's territory? At which point the helicopter went down. The guy got out of there and a bunch of guards came out after him. Zuomin said very importantly to the girl that he was in the territory of his home country. All the guards were armed. The guest pointed a gun at the protagonist and said he could shoot anyone back. Shu rushed to her husband's defense. She fearfully shouted to the guest that he had gone mad. The girl asked Shuiming, what does he want to accomplish now? The guy was still holding the gun. The guest was unhappy that the girl was marrying the protagonist instead of him. He decided to kill his rival Jan to get the girl. The protagonist asked his girlfriend completely calmly what kind of jerk was standing in front of them. Shu told her friend that Shui Minyu is very famous in the capital in Country X. He is also a complete psychopath and a perverted madman. Ian told his wife tenderly that he was beginning to love her even more. He stroked her head. The protagonist cheerfully told his companion that he was a doctor who could cure anything. Ian turned to the guy and said if he was a psychopath, he'd cure him. Su-min pointed his gun at his opponent and said he would shoot him right away. The main character told the interlocutor that he had a problem with his head and hearing. He once again called the guest a psychopath. Sumin guy got really angry. He shouted at his rival that he was looking for death. The guest pulled the trigger. The gun didn't go off. There was a blank click. Xing shouted angrily to the main character to rather lie down on the ground. The girl closed her eyes fearfully. When she opened them, she saw that the main character was alive and well. He told her that nothing had happened. Xing looked anxiously at her friend. Yang explained to the girl that there was a blank cartridge in the gun. The protagonist hugged his girlfriend and asked, "Did the sound of the gun scare her to death?" Zhu Min decided to reload his weapon. He shouted to the protagonist that he had the courage to make the first attempt. Zhu Min took out another round of ammunition from his pocket. He shouted to his opponent that they would play for real. Guest told the protagonist that he had chambered blank bullets and one real live round in the revolver. Zhu Min told his opponent that they would take turns shooting each other in the temple. The loser would leave a Xing forever and never bother the girl again. The protagonist looked at his opponent with a smile. He wasn't intimidated. Yang agreed to the terms of the duel and extended his hand to the pistol in Shui Ming's hand. The protagonist put the gun to his head and asked, "Should he pull the trigger now?" Shui Ming shouted angrily to his opponent that they would play longer. The guy thought to himself that the gun had ammunition with special sensors, and as soon as the protagonist pulled the trigger, a shot would definitely be fired. The girlfriend yelled to the protagonist that she shouldn't have agreed to the terms of the duel. Yang hugged his girlfriend and said that he would put the psycho Sui Min in his place, so that he would never bother the girl again. The protagonist pulled the trigger, but no shot was fired. The protagonist grudgingly said the shot came from a blank cartridge. Zhu Min was amazed and excited. He couldn't understand why the bullet didn't explode. The guy said it was his turn. He decided that next time the main character would be sure to turn his brains to mush. Ian put the gun to his head and decided to fire another shot. The guards looked on in amazement. Another shot was a blank. Xing was very worried. She was afraid that nothing would happen to her husband. The ex-Shui Min guy was very much astonished and displeased. He didn't understand why his bullets weren't working. The protagonist put the gun to his head and another shot went blank. Yang pointed his gun at his opponent and said there was only one shot left. He added that it was Shui Ming's turn. Zhu Min was very much frightened. He couldn't understand what kind of magic the protagonist was using. Yang pointed a gun at his opponent. He said that he would die without suffering. The frightened Shui Ming suggested that his rival negotiate. After that, a gunshot rang out. The guards excitedly called out to young master Shui Ming. The guy was really scared. The sound of the gunshot really hurt his ear. The guards excitedly called out to their boss Chui. They were very excited. Zhu Min shouted to his subordinates not to stand, but to nail the protagonist. Xing reminded her guests that they were on the private property of the Yi family. The guy angrily shouted that he would first break all of the main character's limbs and then fuck off Xing. The subordinates angrily said that after Shui has had his fun, To will have his turn. The girl looked anxiously at her friend. The main character told his wife to calm down. The main character told his worried wife that the guys around him were no longer alive. The protagonist stood calmly. Around him were bandits with guns. Zhu Min frightenedly noticed how his opponent brought his hand up to hit him. Yang knocked Shui Ming to the ground with a very fast, sharp, and powerful punch. Then the protagonist with quick and powerful blows disarmed the guards who ran up to him. All of Shui Ming's accomplices were beaten and neutralized. He himself was barely able to get to his feet. Shui Ming asked Yang Yunfan with surprise, "Is this one planning to keep fighting?" He added that he has thousands more ways to kill the main character. Yang tossed the bullets from his hand to the ground and told his opponent not to get his nose too high. Shui Min and his accomplices were very surprised. They could not understand how the protagonist was able to catch bullets with his bare hands. The protagonist threatened his opponent formidably and slyly that if he insulted Xing girlfriend one more time, he wouldn't get around to shooting his ear off. A frightened Shu Min prepared to flee in a helicopter. He threatened the protagonist that he would take revenge on him the next time they met. The protagonist, as if nothing had happened, offered his girlfriend a taste of egg pancakes. He started stirring the ingredients in a bowl. Xing was surprised to think that her friend had a lot of unexpected surprises. The protagonist then drove to the hospital building in his car. In the parking lot, a guy was sitting in a brightly painted pink car. The people standing around him were surprised. A group of guys decided to approach a car to meet the female driver. One of them wanted to ask the girl to join their subculture. The side window opened and the protagonist yelled at the strangers to get out. The guys were surprised that a man was driving such a car. They apologized for not seeing the brute force and brutality of this car. A guy went into the main waiting room of the clinic. He had a meeting with a girl. The female interlocutor looked at the arriving Dr. Yan with excitement and joy. After that, the girl rushed over and hugged the protagonist. He was a little embarrassed. The interviewee said that she was Li Ju's younger sister. Her older brother had a heart attack this morning and is now in the hospital. Yang promised the interviewee that he would help the patient. The protagonist and his companion quickly ran into the ward. Jan asked the doctors how the patient was doing. The doctors were overjoyed at the arrival of the protagonist. Someone said that Li Ju inherited his disease from his father. The patient's heartbeat is weakening. Ian said confidently to all present that he would bring the patient to his senses. The main character looked at the guy lying there. He was unconscious. He had a weak heartbeat. The patient's condition gradually began to improve. His heart rate stabilized. After a brief pause, Li Ju opened his eyes and began to come to his senses fully. The people around rejoiced. Someone confirmed that the protagonist had earned his title of Divine Doctor. One nurse shouted happily that if their hospital had Dr. Yang, their hospital could be considered the best in the city. Jan told those present to leave and that he needed to run some more tests. The doctors happily told the guy to finish what he started. A weary Yang tells the patient that he feels like he's having a heart attack too. The girl wanted to explain to the main character about her brother's illness. Yang said that Lu Ju is much heavier than his father. The protagonist told the patient that it would take 100-year-old mountain ginseng to extract it. The patient was amazed when he heard about the century-old wild ginseng. He sighed sadly. The girl asked her brother why is he sighing and is ginseng really expensive. Li Ju explained to his sister that the ginseng in the markets everywhere is artificial. They need to find mountain ginseng that cannot be bought. The protagonist looked at the patient and his sister with an attentive gaze. Yang decided that Lu Ju is a good person who works for the good of the community. The protagonist told his interlocutors with a smile that he would do his best to help them. Lu Ju was very excited and thanked Dr. Yan with a smile. The girl looked at the main character with great excitement. She hoped he would help her brother. After a long day of work at the hospital, the main character went out in the evening to get something to eat. Ian told himself that he would have to go shopping now looking for something edible. The guy noticed his two girlfriends sitting at the table. Gu Ruochu suggested to her interlocutor, Xing Shu, to have a good meal this evening. The friends were sitting at the table and remembering how they used to come to this restaurant for lunch. Xing Shu thought to herself that the food from the main character was much tastier. The main character couldn't understand why the Gu Ruochu was so critical of him. He thought she was angry with him because he had touched her. Suddenly, Jan saw some sort of red beam being directed at his girlfriend's head. The frightened boy yelled for his girlfriend to lie down on the ground. Suddenly, a rifle shot rang out. The girl turned around frightened. Xing Shu didn't even notice the rifle bullet flying at her. She was scared. The main character showed up just in time. He grabbed all the bullets that were flying at the girl. At this time, there was a killer on the high tower of the Sanjiang who shot the girl. The gunner looked through the telescopic sight. He told himself that his weapon was designed to fire at a range of up to 8 kilometers. The sniper noticed with surprise in his scope that the girl didn't die after his shot. Yan asked the interviewee if she was all right. The girl replied fearfully that she was in pain. The girl asked the protagonist excitedly, why was he so scared for her? At that time, another shot rang out. A protective hood activated around the girl and the bullet was stopped. Gu's girlfriend ran to the girl and yelled that they needed to get out of here as soon as possible to the safe place. Yang warned Ruochu to stay back as there was a protective barrier around them now. Yang said excitedly to her friend that she had brought the jade with her. It is this talisman that protects her. The girl looked at the jade stone with surprise. She couldn't believe it was the one that protected her. Yang replied that he didn't know anything about the situation, but he was surprised when she asked her friend what was going on. The protagonist said they're about to find out. He activated his magic skills. A fire elemental sword appeared from the guy's hand. He prepared to strike the gunslinger. The protagonist launched a large fire whirlwind far to the side upwards. A large fireball headed towards the tower. That's where the sniper was. The shooter took aim and decided to hit the girl with a second shot. After that, the fireball struck the surprise shooter from the top of the tower. Ian shouted to his girlfriend to be taken away by the bodyguards. He warned that there might be more snipers around. The girlfriend excitedly told the guy to be careful, at which time the protagonist raced in a car to catch up with the intruder. The perpetrator was running and yelling as he ran that he had done wrong. The gunman was almost running up to the wall and had nowhere to hide. He yelled that he'd fuck up the car if Jan hit him. The protagonist kept going full throttle. He didn't think to slow down. At the last moment, the intruder yelled for the driver of the car to spare him. The protagonist drove into the intruder. He crushed him. The doors opened and Jan came out. He headed toward the still-living intruder. Yang told the shooter that he wanted to hurt someone close to him. He asked the shooter who was directing him. The intruder shouted to the protagonist that he was pleading guilty. He added that he was being led by the tiger leader from the pink bar. Yang pressed the culprit's head to the earth. He asked why the tiger wanted the death of the girl Xing Shu. The intruder frightenedly told the protagonist that he didn't know why the headman was targeting the girl. That's when the sirens went off. It was the police arriving at the scene. The perp yelled at the cops to take them to jail with him. The protagonist punched the intruder and shouted for him to shut up. The protagonist realized he had to head to the pink bar now. at which time a police car arrived at the scene. The policewoman got out of the car and looked at the unconscious sniper. The girl looked closely at the intruder and realized that she recognized that handwriting. The policewoman said confidently that the bloody unicorn Yang Yunfang was involved here. The guards near the entrance told Yan menacingly to stop. They wanted to ask him for his pass. The protagonist instantly beat and disarmed the guards. He calmly walked on. The club was full of guests. There was loud music playing and everyone was having fun. Ian walked around the cheerful people. He decided that everything here was a lot of fun. At that time, there was a scream from some girl. She was running and screaming to be rescued. The protagonist became agitated. He looked to the side. Ian heard the girl's screams. A group of guys were chasing a stranger. They shouted at her not to run away from them. The protagonist was very surprised. He looked sideways at the girl running away, after which the frightened stranger knocked the protagonist to the ground with a great burst of speed. Ian held out his hand to help the girl. At this time, a group of bandits approached them. The bandit grabbed the stranger by the arm and demanded that she get up. She was very frightened. A group of miscreants were looking at the girl. One of them said that their boss would be overjoyed to have such a guest. One bandit said that the boss would definitely give the girl some money. The girl was very frightened. Tears were streaming from her eyes. She couldn't have saved herself. The protagonist grabbed the stranger's hand with his own. He decided to help her. Ian menacingly told his interlocutor not to believe the words of various bastards. He added that he was a very good doctor. The stranger looked at the protagonist with surprise and with hope. The bandits menacingly told the guy that this bar belonged to their boss. One of them said that the protagonist had had enough of life if he decided to interfere with them. Jan was absolutely not scared. He was calm and determined to attack his opponents. The protagonist struck one of the bandits with a very powerful swing. Ian punched the thug from the elbow and yelled that he would find the owner of the pink bar first. Yang angrily added that he would settle scores with the leader. He continued to beat up his opponents. The protagonist grabbed one of the thugs and demanded that he take him to the boss. After that, the guy opened the door to the boss's office and shouted angrily for him to come out. The guy suddenly saw that there was a girl sitting on the couch. She greeted him with a smile. The stranger replied that the tiger was a very busy man and she was temporarily replacing him. The girl asked the guest what he was doing here. She added that her name was Do Megan. The Do told the guest that he could spend time in her company. Jan got very excited. He didn't understand why the girl was behaving so provocatively. The interlocutor moved closer to the guy and asked why he was always silent. The Do was still looking romantically at the guy. She offered him something to eat. After that, the Sobednitsa took out a huge knife and said that Yang would get it as food. The protagonist grabbed the girl's arm sharply. The Do dropped the huge knife. The guy told the interviewer that she was the tiger's girlfriend. He asked if she wanted to take responsibility for her ringleader's actions. Ian angrily and menacingly told his interlocutor that there was a limit to his patience. The girl was scared. She didn't say anything. She waited for help to come to her. At that time, there were shouts. A group of people were running from the side. Someone shouted that they should protect the Do. Yang turned around in surprise. A whole herd of armed bandits running to take out the protagonist. The intruders with guns in their hands decided to kill Jan in a mob. The Do felt more confident. She shouted to the protagonist that he was going to die today. Ian grabbed his sword and shouted angrily to his companion that he wasn't going to die today. Then the protagonist threw his sword up. He decided to fight with his bare hands. Ian told his companion that he would easily deal with the bandits. He sped up and ran for the exit. The protagonist began beating and disarming the intruders with his bare hands. Yang kicked one of the attacking bandits with a huge swing. The Do was amazed at the vigor with which the protagonist beat up his opponents. The girl thought to herself, Yang is fighting a crowd all by himself and he'll run out of steam sooner or later. The Do looked at the guy and was very much surprised. Yang had dispersed his opponents very quickly. The main character stood alone in the hallway. All the bandits had been neutralized and their heads were sticking out of the ceiling. The Do was very much surprised at how Yang dealt with 100 bodyguards very quickly. The girl saw the evil protagonist in front of her. She didn't realize who he was. Yang demanded of his interlocutor that the tiger leader come to him within 3 days. The main character said that if the tiger didn't come to him, the lives of his subordinates would become unbearable. Ian looked angrily at the girl and asked again if she understood him. The Do fearfully replied to her interlocutor that she understood him completely. Yang said goodbye to Xiao Meigun. After that, the protagonist arrived at the house of the Dong Xiaoxiao family. There he was greeted by a girl. She said she would go and call her brother. Ian saw on the shelves a huge number of awards for various hand-to-hand battles. The guy scrutinized the awards on the shelves. There were a lot of them. A girl brought her brother in a wheelchair. His name was Dong Da Peng. The brother looked at the guest and thanked him for saving his sister in the pink bar. Yang smiled at his companions and told them not to thank him. Dong excitedly said that because of his illness, he had caused a lot of trouble for his sister and Yang. The brother said that he traveled all over the capital but could not find any doctors to help him. In the end, he spent all his savings. Yang told his interlocutor that his physical fitness level is at a breakthrough stage. This means that Dong has great physical potential. The protagonist took a magic artifact out of his pocket. He told his interlocutor that he could cure him. Yang activated the magic needles in the patient's body. He asked his brother, why did his spine collapse? Dong said that his spinal problems occurred when he fought in underground hand-to-hand combat. The fighter had finished the competition and was on his way home. That's when he met a man called Tiger. The Tiger offered Dong to lose in a competition for a separate reward. The fighter refused the leader. As a result, the Tiger organized an assassination attempt on the fighter, and Dong miraculously survived. The protagonist told the interlocutor that they had been harmed by the same person. He added that special things were needed to treat the fighter. Dong was surprised that his treatment required Taoist inscriptions. He asked Yan, "Is the one who is a cultivator?" Yang informed the patient that he was using acupuncture and plaques to agitate the withered meridians in his body. The protagonist carefully warned the Dong that he was starting and to be patient. The patient's body glowed a bright pink color after the protagonist activated his skill. 15 minutes later, Yang went out to rest in the neighboring room. The girl excitedly asked if her brother was okay. The protagonist was sitting by the table and sipping tea. He replied that the patient was fine. Yang reported that Dong would not just get back on his feet, but he would be stronger than he was once before. At which time the patient left the room. He was healthy, robust, and strong. The girl was startled and surprised because of the fact that her brother was able to take her door with a swing. The patient came out and said that Yang is indeed a hidden master and divine doctor. Dong Dapeng told the protagonist that he admired him. Yang was very surprised, looking at his patient's healthy body. The girl was very distressed. She had no money to repair the wall and doors. Dong fell on his knees in front of the main character and said that he would remember his kindness and healing all the time. Ian said with a smile to the patient that he was very polite. He asked that the fighter come to the pink bar tomorrow to thank him. The main character came home. He felt that he was very hungry. He had not had a chance to eat a snack all day. The guy looked at the table and was surprised to see that there was a pot standing there. Yang opened the pot. There was delicious food in it. He thought that Sing Shu had cooked it all. The main character consumed the contents of the pot very quickly. He thought he was lucky to have a wife. At this time, Xing Shu was happily watching her friend. The girl thought happily to herself, feeling good in her heart after thanking the Yang. The main character stopped eating. He heard something suspicious around him and turned around. After that, Jan threw himself on the railing and climbed up onto the balcony very quickly. The guy stood up and noticed the broken talisman lying on the floor in front of him. Yang reached out his hand and took the jade talisman that had been broken into 2 pieces. The protagonist held the jade in his hands. He decided to himself that he would first fix the thing and then return it. Ian was at the hospital. He got a call for an unscheduled appointment. Jan examined the patient. The patient said that at first he thought he had a cold. Now he had complications. At other hospitals, no one could find the cause of his illness. The protagonist read that an old man and an old woman had been admitted to the hospital. At first, it was assumed that the old man was sick with a common cold. Ian carefully translated the tests and concluded that the patient did not have a cold but a contagious viral infection. At that time, someone's clapping sounded from the side. An unfamiliar guy was listening to the protagonist. The guest said that he had at first assumed that all the doctors in this hospital were quacks. He did not expect that there would be a master who could determine the cause of the disease at a glance. Ian was surprised to ask the uninvited interlocutor who he was. The stranger laughed very merrily. He liked the protagonist's question. The guy pointed his finger at his interlocutor and said he would answer him sincerely. The guest said that he published a scientific paper at the age of 10. At 18, he graduated from Harvard. At 23, he became the youngest professor at the Mayo Medical Center. The guy shouted joyfully and proudly that he was Dr. Edward Norton. A passing doctor told the protagonist that he could try to cure the old man of an unknown disease. Edward Norton said angrily that he was a true medical genius. He added that the disease of an elderly patient could not be cured. Jan told his interlocutor that he would try to cure the patient. Edward Norton said they are dealing with a new type of influenza, while there is no perfect treatment for such a disease in the world. After that, the guest promised that if the protagonist cures the old man, he will invite him to the Mayo Medical Center. After that, Lancet Publishing will put out an article that will restore the greatness of Chinese medicine. Yang told his interlocutor that Chinese medicine heals people, and he doesn't need the article to be published by Lancet Publishing. The protagonist looked confidently at Dr. Norton and said he would show him what Chinese medicine could do. Yang used needle pricks to treat a patient according to an ancient medical treatise. Edward Norton asked the main character how effective is Chinese acupuncture. Yang explained that Chinese acupuncture allows the true energy of qi to be utilized. At this time, he gave the last injection to the patient. After the guy stuck the needle in the old man's head, he started mumbling something incoherent. Dr. Norton wondered. A pink lightning bolt appeared between the doctor's hand and the patient's head. Dr. Norton was surprised at what he saw. He realized that there was something magical inside the old man. Edward realized that he was seeing before him now the Indian heretical curse of the Brahmin. The doctor saw before him a pile of skulls in a pink glow. It was the seventh great poison of the Indian Ocean colors. The patient's wife came to the ward and saw that her old man was awake. The patient and his wife thanked the protagonist and said that he had the right to be called a divine doctor. Dr. Norton was amazed. He dropped to his knees in surprise and said that this is what Chinese medicine is all about. After which, the guy started pestering the main character to tell him the secrets of his medical prowess. Yang replied to his interlocutor that he still had tons of things to do at the hospital. He added that Norton to study Chinese medicine to help treat and care for patients. Dr. Edward Norton decided slyly to himself that he would stay in this hospital to study the delights of Chinese medicine. In a secret villa, the leader was talking to his subordinate Xiao. The leader told the subordinate that the subordinate wanted to kill the girl Qiang so that no one else would have her. The boss lit a cigar. He asked his subordinate, why didn't he tell him about Yang Yunfang right away? The ringleader told the guy that the situation was getting more and more delicate. Xiao promised the ringleader that if he helped him kill the protagonist, he would give him a good place in the trading network of Sichuan and Tibet. The ringleader approached the bound girl. He told the Xiao guy that he appreciated his sincere thoughts. The tiger dropped the ashes of the cigar on the girl and told the interlocutor that he would cut off 2 ears from Yang Yunfan's dead body and send them to Xiao. The bound girl screamed very loudly after ash fell on top of her. The tiger sat back in his chair and commanded his subordinates to get on with the job. The ringleader summoned a subordinate nicknamed the Honorable Devil. The fighter Venerable Devil said that he would help the tiger for the headmen, had once helped to find the 6th patriarch of the Dian sect. The fighter then recalled that the Brahmin had helped infect several old ones with poison that was supposed to bring calamity to the world. The protagonist was in the office with his subordinates at the time. The guy asked the protagonist, why did he call them out of the blue like that? Jan decided to tell his arriving colleagues a very important story. There was a flu outbreak in Southeast Asia. A whole village was infected and the government never saved it. The government decided to burn down the village to neutralize all those sickened by the new virus. Jan reported that further investigation revealed that the virus was propagated by a Brahmin. Brahmin spread the virus so that he could study it. Influenza was very different from ordinary diseases. Therefore, it had great toxicity and contagiousness. The main character told his friends that the city could be facing an epidemic that could turn into a pandemic. Dong asked the protagonist with surprise what was required of them. Ian informed his subordinates that they should trace the source of the poison. This should be done at the drug-dealing places in the city. Also, the boys should buy up as many Chinese medicinal herbs as possible so that he could prepare an antidote. The protagonist told his subordinates that if the tiger didn't come to him, his friends should help him flatten the pink bar. Dong told his interlocutor that 2 of his 3 instructions had already been done. Yang asked the guy again, what did he mean? The interlocutor said that his ancestor was a doctor who collected medicinal herbs. He would be able to find them. Dong added that the pink bar is a prime location for drug sales. That means the tiger ringleader must have sources. The protagonist commanded Dapeng to go tomorrow to prepare herbs. After that, Yang commanded his subordinate Qiang to help him protect the girl Qiang. Subordinates sharply and confidently commanded the boss that they would get things done. Qiang reminded the protagonist that he helped his sister Lin. He added that he would help protect Miss Yi. Yang put his hands on the shoulders of Qiang and Dong. He told them that they were his brothers. The protagonist told his subordinates menacingly that they needed to solve one last case tonight. Yang walked out with his subordinates. He shouted for the tiger leader to prepare for defeat. The protagonist and his companions arrived at the pink bar. He opened the door with his foot. Yang and his companions entered the room. There was silence all around. Dong asked the protagonist, did they really come to the right place? It was quiet inside, and there were no people in sight. At this time, there was a noise from outside, as if something was flying at the Dong. Dong was very frightened. He didn't know what was happening. Yang rushed to help his friend. The protagonist grabbed the flying magical pink arrow with a very quick movement. Frightened Dong asked surprised at the protagonist, what did he just catch? Yang replied to the interlocutor that he had caught the arrow of spiritual hatred. The protagonist activated his magic skills. He saw a bright pink glow appear from the arrow. Within the pink glow were a great many souls in the form of burning skulls. Ian explained to his friends that they had now seen the devil's ghost. If someone is hit by a magic arrow, the victim will be controlled by the one who let that arrow go. This kind of skill is only used by Brahmins. Out of the darkness came someone's voice. The stranger said that he had been away from China for 10 years, but someone remembered the great teachings of his Brahmin sect. The boys were surprised to see a Brahmana in front of them. Dong said that the tiger had actually enlisted the help of a Brahmana. The Brahmin angrily told the guests that soon they would all go to hell. At this time, the bar customers appeared. They were all in the form of zombies. The Brahmin told the zombies to kill the people who had come to the bar. The zombies viciously rushed at the protagonist and his companions from the get-go. John commanded his friends that they were seeing ordinary people whose minds had been absorbed by the Brahmin. He added that the subordinates should not kill the monsters in front of them. The boys replied that they would do so. The Brahmin angrily said that if the guests wanted to save the people enslaved to him, they would do so only at the cost of their lives. At this time, a huge blue lightning bolt flew from the Brahmana towards the Qiang. Dong and the protagonist fearfully called out to his friend Qiang, who was in danger. Qiang remained on his feet. He asked grudgingly to the barman why he was hitting him so hard. Yang and Dong asked their friend, did he really wear special gear? The interlocutor said that he used his favorite brother's special suit. Qiang asked the protagonist how they could defeat the Brahmana. The protagonist told his friend to protect himself and Dong Dapeng. He added that he was taking on the Brahmin. Brahmin angrily asked the protagonist, did the latter think he could handle him? He added that his movement was faster than a bullet. After which the protagonist kicked his opponent in the groin very quickly. Brahmin was in a lot of pain after being hit by the protagonist. He didn't expect that. Jan asked the Wicked One from his rival, does he want him to sing him a song about a starlet? The frightened Brahmin didn't understand how the guy was able to match his speed and strike a precise blow. Ian explained to his opponent that he was hiding behind the backs of his own hostages. The protagonist shouted to his rival to tell the purpose for which he had come to China and was about to commit a crime. He demanded from the Brahmin to tell where the tiger head was. Brahmin angrily replied to the cold hero that he would tell him nothing. The protagonist stretched out his hand to the Brahmin and said that the latter would die. The man was frightened. He shouted at his rival to stop and promised to tell everything. Brahmin thought fearfully to himself that he had to make one last move. Brahmin decided to use his special skill and pretend to be dead. Jan asked the surprised rival, why is there pretending to be dead in the form of a turtle? The protagonist cheerfully shouted to his opponent that he had many thousands of varied methods of bringing him back to life. Yang took out a huge needle 40 meters long. He shouted to the Brahmin to try to run away from him. There was a noise from outside. Someone kicked in the doors to the room. The police ran into the room. Someone shouted at the protagonist to drop his needle and not touch the turtle. Yang and his subordinates raised their hands fearfully in front of the police officers. A girl in a police uniform walked in. She told the protagonist that 3 years ago he ruined their plans on the Amazon. Now she's going to arrest him and bring him to justice. Ian slipped his hand into his pocket. He didn't realize what kind of girl was standing in front of him. The protagonist grudgingly asked the stranger who was she. The policewoman was very angry. She didn't like that the person she was talking to didn't recognize her. The stranger once again reminded the protagonist of the Amazon service. She added that it was the Yan's fault that they were exposed. The guy told her that her name was Nalan's son. He didn't want to warn the mercenaries about the ambush, and he didn't do it on purpose. Nalan angrily questioned the boy. Is he begging for mercy? She added that it was Yan's fault that she was suspended from the service. She had a little bit left to get her medal. The policewoman angrily told her interlocutor that she knew when to stop. She added that the guy would get hurt but not die. The subordinates looked joyfully at the chief of the Nalan. Someone shouted that she was the most authoritative in the army. Ian picked up a piece of wood from the floor. He asked her, does she really want to take revenge on him? The main character held a stick in his hands. He told the girl that she was fluent in kung fu. The guy touched the stick with his hand and told his opponent that her abilities wouldn't help her win this fight. Then the protagonist created a huge sword out of a stick with his skills. The girl noticed that a huge pink dragon appeared next to the main character. Nalanya was surprised that her opponent was able to master the special art of sword handling. The policemen were very surprised to see a real dragon in front of them. Jia and Dugang were surprised that Yang had a professional mastery of the martial and effective sword technique. A policeman shouted that the protagonist looks like a first-class master. He added that the battle will be interesting. The policeman added that Nalan and Yang have an uncomplicated relationship. The officer thought to himself frustrated that Captain Nalan could love the protagonist. Most of the cops were in love with Captain Nalan, but they didn't use the love response. The policewoman remembered that she had worked hard since returning to China. Now her department had no worthy rivals for her. The girl didn't expect Yang to be able to learn the forgotten ball technique. Right now, Nalan felt a great sense of oppression before the battle. The policewoman officially told the protagonist that he would be punished for his crimes. After that, the girl kicked off the ground and ran at her opponent. Nalanya shouted angrily to the protagonist that she would teach him a good lesson. The protagonist calmly prepared to fend off an attack by a policewoman. Ian instantly pushed off and was able to scoot away so that he was behind the girl. The protagonist told Naylan, standing behind her, that he would show her what speed really meant. The guy grabbed a cop and started dancing around the room with her really fast. At that time, Qiang's phone rang. He said excitedly to the people around him to go on. The girl looked angrily at the protagonist. She even lost the power of speech with anger. Ian ran away quickly to the side. The policewoman yelled at the protagonist for humiliating her when he changed the fight to a dance. The protagonist looked angrily at the girl and shouted that she was finished. And then the protagonist jumped aside. The policewoman noticed that her rival had disappeared. Suddenly, Yang appeared in front of Naylan and pointed his magic sword at her. The policewoman was very frightened. The sword beam stopped right at her throat. The policemen pointed their guns at the protagonist. Someone shouted that they should kill Yan. The main character yelled to the cops not to kill him as he was only joking. Ian told the policewoman not to be afraid of him or his harmless jokes. The main character told the policewoman that he had discovered that reality is not at all as it is described in the books. He added that only those who have no power or money want to become great knights and bring justice to the world. The girl replied to her interlocutor that all his words were not true. She added to get his hands off her. Ian thought that the girl was hiding her embarrassment in flashes of anger. He took her by the shoulders and said that she was very good at dagger strokes. The guy told the interviewee to keep practicing hard to get stronger. The protagonist thought happily to himself that the policeman even began to shake with excitement. He decided that now he would definitely not go to jail. The girl turned to the officer without turning around. He immediately ran up and said that he was listening to her. Ian happily turned around and shouted that they were all going to be led home now. Nalanya commanded that the protagonist and his friends be put in the most brutal cell. The detainees were transferred to the detention room. Director Zhou asked how the investigation was going. Zhou asked his subordinates if they had any leads on a tiger drug dealer named Lin Tianhu. Nalan reported to the director that they found no trace of the tiger. She added that they noticed suspicious people in the pink bar. They arrested Yang Yunfan, while the protagonist was helping his fellow inmates get rid of their illnesses. There were many people willing to do so. The prisoners promised that they would become law-abiding citizens when they got out. There were many people in front of the protagonist. There was a whole line of them. Jia told the prisoners that they had a chance to start a new life. A policeman shouted that Yan had great medical talent. The guy cured the prisoners in one guard. Naylan yelled at his subordinate to shut up and knocked him on the head. Zhou walked up to the camera and asked the protagonist if he was Yang Yunfan. The policeman angrily asked the protagonist, "What is his relationship with Ling Tianhu?" The protagonist stood silent. The prisoners around him became even more frightened. The prisoner was frightened because of the way Director Zhou Yi looked at him. He felt that the policeman's gaze literally consumed his life. The cellmate glanced over and noticed that Yang remained completely calm and unperturbed. He decided that the protagonist had gone crazy from screaming Zhou, and the protagonist told the policeman that he had never seen Ling Tianhu in person. Ian explained that he was a regular doctor and went to a bar after work today to relax. Yang told the policeman that he had met a strange bandit who had taken the Chinese hostage. For this reason, he decided to help them. He asked Zhou Yi, "Is this kind of help a violation of the law?" Zhou looked at the protagonist carefully and angrily. He was studying him. The policeman analyzed Yan's behavior and realized that all his words were true. The detainee remained calm even when Zhou pressured him. Nalan shouted at the policeman not to give in to the ruse. She recalled that the protagonist had caught a sniper who was under the command of Ling Tianhu. Yang told the policewoman that there would be no benefit for him to catch the sniper Ling Tianhu if he was in his charge. The main character told the girl that her mind and brain had moved into her chest. Nalanya got really pissed off. She asked the protagonist, "Does he really think she's busty and brainless?" Yang became very amused. The policeman Zhou said that they didn't need to discuss such topics right now. Zhou asked seriously to the detainee, how can the detainee prove his innocence? The protagonist asked that Qiang show the video he had recorded before their mass fight. Qiang took out his phone and said that it contained a video that would prove their innocence. He showed it to the police. The guy turned on a video on his phone. There were beautiful girls singing a song about how they loved their big brother. The policeman angrily asked the prisoners, "Is this really their proof?" Qiang apologized to the police officers and said he had turned on the wrong app and asked them to wait. Zhou told the guys in the cell that he would confiscate their phone and check it for illegal videos and other possible evidence. Qiang told the excited police officers that he had found what they needed and showed them the phone. In the video footage, you could see a huge number of zombie people walking around inside the bar. The policewoman hesitated. She couldn't believe that the protagonist could be innocent. The protagonist asked the policeman Zhou, can he really let them go? Zhou said that the whole situation was a misunderstanding. He commanded the girl to let all 3 detainees go. The cell doors opened, and the protagonist and his friends were released. The detained Brahmin looked unhappily at the protagonist. He decided that there was no one in the prison but Yan to be a worthy opponent for him. Brahman decides he's going to kill all the people in prison and have some fun with a sexy cop. Suddenly, a pink lightning bolt appeared from the side and the needle flew. The man didn't expect it. Suddenly, a magic needle was thrust into the Brahman's neck and he did not have time to defend himself. The protagonist angrily asked the man, "Has he forgotten about him?" The Brahmin was already lying on the floor. Qiang explained to his rival that the needle had blocked his central system. Henceforth, he would not be able to use his spiritual energy. Qiang asked the protagonist, "Won't they interrogate the Brahmana about the tiger leader?" The protagonist explained that they don't know the whereabouts of the other Brahmins. He has no time to investigate. The best thing to do now is to hand the man over to the police. Jan said cheerfully that they had done a noble deed today. Their neckties would appear brighter, after which the protagonist and his companions went out with bright red ties. The Hindu man in the cell demanded a lawyer and said he wanted to return to India. The police demanded information from the detainee about Ling Tianhu and the drug trade in Sanjiang City. A frightened Brahmin sitting in his cell shouting that he was very much afraid. A group of Indians felt that the seal of the fourth great king Brahmana had ceased to be felt. The Hindu said that the spiritual energy of the Brahmana was completely destroyed. The others marveled. An Indian suggested that their colleague had been captured by ancient Chinese sects. Another Indian offered to go in search of the great king Brahman to rescue him. The Indian very much disliked the offer to save the Brahman. The other Hindus were very much surprised. They looked at their colleague with great attention. The Hindu explained that his Brahmin disciple had long ago dedicated his life to the great god and had become his slave. The Indian explained that if a Brahmin got into trouble, he could only apologize by death. After that, the spiritual teacher squeezed the burning bundle he held in his hand. The burned bundle shattered into lots of little pieces, all of them falling down. The Hindu said angrily that they should prepare to postpone the epidemics to an earlier date. He added that the whole city should be plunged into chaos. Thus, they are giving a send-off for their great fourth Brahmin king. The subordinate Hindus replied to their master that they would do after all. The main character was at home. It was raining very hard outside. Xing Shu told herself that she wanted to have breakfast with her husband in the morning, and Yang is still asleep. The protagonist woke up and asked his wife in a sleepy voice, "Isn't she working today?" Xing Shu replied calmly to her interlocutor that she had already made breakfast. Yang happily shouted to his wife that she is a hot, long-legged hottie. The guy added that he wondered why didn't Xing Shu become a model. The girl wrestled the guy away from her and told him to get out. The wife shouted that Jan starts the morning with lewdness. Jan replied, sadly, "Everyone has the right to appreciate beauty." He asked his wife, "Where did she get such a bat?" Xing Shu replied to her husband that it shouldn't concern him why she bought the bat. A guy and a girl heard a report on TV. The announcer said that a suspect in an important case died during interrogation for an unknown reason. Jan said that an Indian Brahmin monkey died. At that time, the phone rang. The protagonist picked it up immediately. The interlocutor said that a huge influx of patients with an unknown disease had rushed into the hospital. Yang said excitedly that he had cured the original patient and no one else was to get the infection. The protagonist decided that the epidemic was related to the death of an Indian Brahmin. He realized that he had to go back to the hospital. Yang told his wife that he was leaving and that it was very dangerous outside. He added that the girl would be protected by Qiang. The protagonist turned around and told the person he was talking to not to leave the house. He called somewhere and said he had an urgent matter to attend to with Lu Ju. Xing Shu was surprised. She didn't understand what had happened. Yang left without telling her. A girl heard a report on TV that there was a sudden outbreak of infection in Xiangjiang City. The announcer reported that all roads in town were closed to shut down access. The announcer reported that world experts have yet to find a cure for the disease. It was reported on television that the first person to contract the disease was a villager. The virus spared no one, and all the villagers died, and no one survived. The TV announcer said excitedly that they may have no hope at all. Suddenly someone told the girl on the TV the good news. She said they were all saved. The announcer reported that yesterday the city was able to cure an infected patient. The girl on TV added that everyone should go to the hospital to be treated by Dr. Yang Yunfen. The guy himself arrived at the hospital at that time. An excited doctor ran into the hospital and asked the doctors, "What is the situation?" People were very much surprised and delighted by Dr. Yan's arrival. The nurse reported that patients were beginning to gather. There were many people arriving at their hospital and all in critical condition. The protagonist shouted that the situation was under complete control. He demanded that all patients be distributed to different wards. The doctor said that after the epidemic, all the people of the city would be grateful to Yang. The protagonist told his subordinates that no one should die in this epidemic. The main character was in the intensive care unit at the hospital. Ian realized that there was a big increase in illnesses right now. He couldn't treat patients one at a time. The divine doctor realized that he had to use Truth Key to release the needles with a wide range. The guy realized that such a method would consume a lot of his key energy. The spiritual energy of true perfection began to spread around the protagonist. A police nanny came over. She asked excitedly if there were any doctors still available. She added that there were a lot of infected people. The doctor said they could hand the patients over to them. They should all be tested for the virus. The policewoman told her subordinates to make sure they get tested. She herself will go and look for other infected people. One of the officers reminded her boss about her personal safety. Nalanya shouted to her subordinate to follow orders. The policewoman remembered that the main character said that the ancient warriors were immune to the new virus. The girl realized that the epidemic broke out after the death of the Indian Brahmin. She couldn't believe that the whole situation was related to the protagonist. Yang was completely focused at this time. He realized that the last group of patients were people with a serious condition of infectious disease. The protagonist concentrated and realized that he had to hold out as much as possible right now. Yang activated a skill called the Voice of Heaven and the spiritual energy of true refinement. The protagonist realized that with the golden body of virtues, he could recover his lost true ki. Even longer, he would not be able to last. Yang hoped that his subordinate Dapeng should meet the deadline. The guy driving the big jeep was very unhappy. The rain kept him from driving. Dong Dapeng saw a fence in front of him with guards. A soldier shouted to the driver that the area ahead was blocked off for quarantine. Dapeng shouted to the soldiers to run away. He had just gotten a call from Yang saying that the situation was very serious. The driver shouted that he could not obey the law now. The guy decided not to stop and go for it. He pushed the gas pedal to the floor. A huge SUV full speed ahead of the metal fence. The soldiers near the entrance were very frightened. The driver shouted for them to open up now. Police Joe and commanded his subordinates to open the gate as soon as possible. Subordinate, asked the policeman who arrived at the roadblock. Joan replied that he knew the guy who arrived and was taking responsibility. The policeman ordered the officers to clear the way for the jeep. In that vehicle were medicines that could solve the epidemic. Nalanya and her colleagues were anxiously waiting for help from the protagonist. The guy continued to drive the jeep at full speed. Police officers cleared the way. Dong rejoiced. He had one corner to pass and there would be the Shinhai hospital next. At which time sparks appeared from the bottom of the jeep. The vehicle began to break down. Dong shouted angrily and fearfully his car burst into flames. The car skidded sideways. At a high rate of speed, the jeep veered off to the side, and the rear of the jeep popped out from behind the guardrail. And then the car slid off the side railing. It could have started going downhill at any moment. The jeep had stopped. It could go down at any moment. Dong was still inside. The driver was shouting angrily that he was finished. He lost control. Dong realized his car was finished. He knew he couldn't save himself. The policewoman instructed people who were sick not to go out without a mask. She recommended that people not go out of their homes to avoid getting sick. The jeep broke through the guardrail on the road and started plummeting downward from a great height. A policewoman was driving a big truck. She realized she had to hurry. Nalan decided that she would use the sand in the body as a shock absorber to save the Dong and not damage the medication. The jeep fell from a great height off the road into a truck bed filled with sand. The car collapsed from a great height into the back of the car, and sand flew in all directions after the fall. The jeep got stuck in a pile of sand. The driver and his cargo were safe in the back. The policewoman opened the door and asked the driver fearfully if he was okay. The battered and injured guy replied to the policewoman that he was fine. He added that his medication was also fine. Dong said he can't take the medicine to the hospital, so it's up to the police. Yang felt that his true qi was completely depleted. He realized that if he continued to use his energy as well, his lifespan would be shortened. The protagonist became agitated. He realized he had one more option. The old man stood next to the boy and asked him why he was chilling instead of practicing. Jan explained that the rat had been injured after a fall. He looked with interest at the small animal which was lying on a rock. The teacher looked at the boy and realized that he was very talented and had a good heart. Jan slipped the rat a small piece of bread. He told it to eat more and gain weight. As a result, its meat would be more flavorful. The old man was very much frightened and angry. He shouted to the boy that medicine should save lives and cast out diseases. The protagonist, standing in the hospital, remembered his mentor's words that he should do everything possible to save human lives. Yang shouted that even if he consumed a lot of true qi and shortened his lifespan, he would never give up on his patients. The policewoman was running and carrying a huge load behind her. She thought the main city should hold out since the medicine was on its way. Nalanya opened the doors of the hospital and ran inside. She called out to the main character. The policewoman excitedly shouted that she had brought medicinal herbs. Asked the protagonist if he's okay. The girl excitedly approached the divine doctor and wanted to put her hand on his shoulder. When Nalanya touched the guy, everything in the hospital room lit up with bright pink flames. A bright pink color shot far upward from the hospital and reached the sky. The girl was surprised. She realized that the main character was able to achieve what he wanted. The policewoman looked at the guy through the glow. She realized that the divine physician had managed to break through. The next day, Yang thought happily to himself that he was able to make a breakthrough through the boundary when he was in the middle of the third stage of Qi. The medicine arrived on time, and he prepared the pills. The patient, after taking such a medicine, would be able to produce antibodies to destroy the virus. Jan walked into the hospital room and told the doctors that thanks to their combined efforts, the epidemic problem had been solved. The protagonist told his subordinates that they were all good and worked hard. There were many reporters outside the hospital. The newscaster reported that many people had gathered to thank the divine doctor. There was a large crowd at the entrance. Reporters were asking the police nana about the protagonist with great interest. One of the journalists shouted that all the doctors should be thanked. Police officer told reporters that they needed to rest because the hospital staff was tired. She said the best way to thank the doctors was to let them all rest. At that time, John came outside. The girl said grudgingly to the guy that his appearance would make all the people even more active. The protagonist asked his girlfriend in surprise, "What is she talking about?" One of the reporters pointed happily at the main character and said that Dr. Yang was out. Reporters rushed the guy. They shouted their thanks. Someone decided to give the protagonist a huge villa as a tribute. There was a very long line of people who wanted it. Suddenly, the main character yelled for people to stop. The guy asked grudgingly, "Who put the sneaker in his mouth?" John demanded that people listen to him. The journalists and guests calmed down. They told Dr. Jan that he could talk. The main character said that saving people's lives is the duty of every doctor. He added that people should take back the items presented to him. After that, the guy turned around and walked into the hospital. He said goodbye to the people. People joyfully and amicably threw things upward and shouted that Yang was the divine doctor. The protagonist lay wearily on the chairs in the hospital. He was glad that all the people who were near the entrances had been escorted out. At this time, the boy was summoned by the fleeing men. Jan turned around unhappily. The guy wasn't happy when he saw Lu Ju. He thought there were already new patients in the hospital. The man smiled happily at the protagonist and said it wasn't like that. Yang said calmly he almost died of fright. Lu Ju bowed to the interlocutor and said that he thanked him on behalf of all the citizens of Sanjiang City. A man standing next to him said with a smile that Lu Ji had said all the right things. If it wasn't for the help of the protagonist, the whole of China would have been in chaos. The protagonist looked at the brothers Zhou and Lu standing next to him. They looked very comical to him. Yang thought happily to himself that no one had ever thanked him like that before. The guy told his interlocutors that it's not all credit to him. There is also a lot of merit for Lu Ju and his companions. The protagonist added that the police and medical staff had done a lot. The man told the protagonist that he was being very modest. At this time, the subordinate reported for Zhou that there was a big accident a kilometer away from the Shanghai hospital. The man replied to the subordinate that accidents should be reported to the traffic department. The man said that Miss Yi Xing-shu had been involved in an accident. The interlocutor said that judging from the CCTV footage, it can be assumed that someone deliberately crashed into Yi Xing-shu. The protagonist and the men were very surprised. The patient was in the ward of the city hospital. The main character said that the girl Xing-shu only had a slight concussion and a few scratches. The protagonist said that the guy Qiang took all the damage to protect the girl. Now the guy is in a semi-living state. Yang recalled the past incident with the sniper. Now the girl was in a car accident. The main character said that all the incidents are the handiwork of Ling Tianhu, but he can't prove it yet. At which time the policewoman said something to the man. They were talking to each other. The man told the interlocutor that Yang Yunfeng had the right to know important information. He asked his subordinate Nalan to tell the protagonist everything. Nalan told the guy that if he suspected Ling Tianhu was responsible for the disaster with his wife, it would not be any trouble to find him. The policewoman reported excitedly that they knew the real reason why Lin Tian had abandoned the pink bar. Ling Tian was able to take over one of the largest underground rings in Sanjiang. As a result, the tiger was able to hire a world champion boxer named Abu for a lot of money. When Abu enters the ring, Ling Tianhu is always personally present. Nalan said they have already organized a squad of outstanding boxers who will pose as contestants. They will be able to capture the intruder. The protagonist asked the cops with interest, why didn't they hire a champion? The policeman said the girl is a boxing champion. Everyone in the city's underworld knows about her reputation. She can't take part in the fight because she will attract a lot of attention. The girl smilingly told the interviewee that he could gain confidence and then have a boxing series of 10 victories. After that, the protagonist could fight Abu. The guy replied that he could not do that. The girl suggested that the boy go to the underground fights. Jian thought to himself that his strength might not be enough to defeat Abu. Nalan told the protagonist that as soon as he saw the Ling Tianhu, he would signal them, and they would go to support him. The protagonist thanked the interlocutors. Jian smiled afterward and said slyly that he would enjoy this fun. A week later, the main character was traveling with his companions on a mountain road in a large bus. Someone reported that they were almost there. The bus stopped outside a secure facility. The driver shouted for everyone to get off. The leader shouted that they had come here to make money. After that, the man said that if any of his subordinates robbed or behaved suspiciously, he would be shot in the forehead. The fighters replied in a friendly manner that they understood everything. At that time, there was a noise from the other side of the door. There was a girl coming up. A door opened, and a female figure emerged from it. She headed towards the fighters. The girl was walking in the direction of the arriving boxing contestants. The girl asked with interest, "Does she see any boxers who will be competing?" The man excitedly replied to the girl named Do that he had checked out all the applicants. The man then reported a special guy named Franklin. He added that this boxer had a very strong fist. The Do was very much interested. She asked the man to show her Franklin's fighter. The main character in slippers came out of the bus. He asked calmly who he needed to beat up, and said that he already had itchy fists. The Do girl came close to the main character and asked if his name was Franklin. Yan confirmed to her interlocutor that it was him. The girl looked at the guy with great attention and asked if they had met before. The protagonist told the woman he was talking to back off a little. He said that he did not want the smell of another woman's odor on him. The Do was very much displeased. She realized that her interlocutor was a very strong redneck and subservient man. The girl told the fighters that tonight they will have an important guest and each of them should give their best. The reward for the one fight will be 100,000. The contestant who defeats the Abu fighter will be rewarded by the tiger with 5 million, while a warrior dressed as a Roman legionnaire was demonstrating his skills. The warrior was very strong. He hovered under the dome of the hall and prepared to finish off his opponent. The fighter landed on top and banged his knee with all his might on his lying opponent. Someone in the audience shouted happily that the fighter nicknamed Blade had impressed him very much. There were qualifying games in the underground boxing tournament. Lin Tianhu made a serious investment, and so boxers from all over the world arrived. A fighter called Blade won 4 games. The main character looked at the fighter in the ring without any emotion. He decided that the fighter's strength was at its last stage, came out to the ring and announced the 3rd round. A fighter named Tiger Clark and Franklin was invited to fight. A spectator with glasses near the protagonist advised him to be careful. Ian looked away from his interlocutor. He decided that the guy looked completely foreign for a place like this. The spectator with glasses wished with a smile for the protagonist to string up all his opponents. Ian looked at his interlocutor and decided that he looked like a lamb born among bloodthirsty wolves. The protagonist turned to the side and thanked the viewer for his concern. Ian stood up and headed towards the ring in his slippers. He hadn't even changed into his fighter's clothes. The protagonist looked at his huge opponent with a smile and said that he had grown very big. The tiger fighter was tall and big-muscled. He looked at his small opponent with surprise. The spectators were very excited. Someone shouted joyfully that the tiger fighter would beat his opponent to death. A man surrounded by beauties told the tiger fighter that if he defeated the protagonist, he would give him his girls for the whole evening. The girl said excitedly to Mr. Liu that she would do it for him. At that time, the girl in the ring yelled to the athletes to get ready. She flipped a coin. Then the fight began. The tiger fighter prepared to attack the protagonist. Yang hit his opponent with all his might and he flew sideways. The girl in the ring was really scared. She never realized what had happened. The spectators were very much amazed. They could not believe that the fight was over so quickly. The tiger fighter was completely crushed very quickly. Not even the coin had time to fall to the ground. Mr. Liu was still smoking his cigar and looking at the ring with a smile. He still didn't understand what had happened. Then the man saw the falling coin and was very frightened. The tiger fighter was completely crushed and defeated by a powerful punch from the protagonist, at which point the coin hit the floor. The fight was already over by then. The spectators were amazed at such a quick outcome of the fight and the tiger's loss. The unexpected result of the fight mowed down the spectators. They fell into unconsciousness. Ian calmly told the girl that the coin was very light. Only it landed, and he had already taken his opponent out of the ring. The girl in the ring said Franklin won. Jan shouted happily that he was dedicating his victory to wife. The audience was overjoyed. They shouted words of encouragement and congratulations to the fighter Franklin. At that time, a girl accompanied by her boss appeared. She thought to herself that she hadn't seen the unicorn for a month, and he was still as cheerful as ever. The girl said with a smile she bet Franklin 10 million. The boss told the interviewer named Miss Elise that she had made a very big bet. The girl replied to Mr. Tiger that she herself knew how to handle her money. Miss Elise looked at the main character and said that she would recognize him in any guise after one look into his eyes. Jan continued to demolish his opponents in the ring. He had victory after victory. He was moving on in the tournament. The audience applauded the protagonist. He thought to himself that his opponents were weaker than he had realized. Suddenly, from the side, the protagonist was called by a fighter and demanded to look at him. The fighter told John very angrily to clear his neck so that it would be easier for him to cut it. The protagonist began to stretch his arms. He told his opponent that he could only scare children with his threats. He added that he could make threats too. And then the guy got into a comical fighting pose. He wanted to scare the fighter. The opponent was briefly frightened. He told the guy in a shaky voice that he was not affected by his threats. After that, the fighter calmed down and angrily told the protagonist that he was acting like a schoolboy. Ian turned around and started to walk away. He told the fighter that his wife had asked him not to talk to the mentally challenged. The girl in the ring shouted that the atmosphere on the court stirred up many spectators. Yang Yunfang went to the dressing room. He decided to make himself look like a clown. While several people were talking in the restroom, a man was smoking and asked his interlocutor unhappily, "Will the protagonist be able to defeat the blade fighter?" The interlocutor replied that Mr. Tiger had ordered that drugs be put in Jan's water. The man said Mr. Tiger made a smart move. In the end, the blade would win and the protagonist would be embarrassed in front of Miss Alice. The man replied that the blade fighter had never lost. The man said he didn't understand why Miss Alice was staring at the Franklin fighter. The protagonist remembered to himself that when he was a child, the old man had added various poisons to the cauldron. The boy regularly tasted them, and so now his organism could not be poisoned by anything. He wondered to himself. He couldn't figure out who Miss Alice was. The spectators were delighted with the fight. Someone shouted that the fighter Zhao Qian had stood up again. The man grudgingly couldn't understand why the fighter didn't immediately knock out his opponent. The audience was clamoring for the fighter to kill his opponent. They were screaming that they wanted to see a show. The fighter on top looked at his opponent and said that he was very weak. The guy opposite could barely stand on his feet. Zhao was very beaten up. He wanted to win the fight to earn $100,000 for his mother's treatment. People angrily shouted curses at the young fighter. Zhao recalled his meeting with his mother. The woman told her son to go home, as she could not be cured. The guy realized angrily to himself that he couldn't admit defeat right now. The huge fighter then swung a punch at Zhao, knocking him to the ring. The blow was so hard that the young lad fell down and could not get up. Zhao lay completely defeated. His broken glasses were lying next to him, and there was a lot of blood. A fighter stood in the ring next to a guy. The announcer yelled out that everyone congratulate the blade fighter on his promotion. The spectators were very happy. They congratulated the blade and demanded that he finish the guy. The spectators shouted and demanded from the fighter to finish off the Zhao lying in front of him. The fighter cheerfully told his lying opponent that he would make a dish out of that one at the request of the spectators. Blade said angrily to the guy that the audience wanted him to finish him off. Zhao was lying very badly beaten. In a barely audible voice, he called out to his mother. A rival angrily told the guy he could call him daddy. Blade shouted to the guy with a smile that it was useless for him to call out for help from anyone. After saying that, the fighter swung around to strike the lying Zhao guy with his fist. The lying guy saw with fading vision as the blade swung around to finish him off. And then the fighter punched the guy as hard as he could with his fist. He finished his opponent. A powerful punch completely crushed and finished Zhao lying in the ring. The audience was ecstatic. They fully supported their idol nicknamed Blade. Blade was overjoyed at his victory. He raised his hands up and shouted loudly. The announcer announced to the cheering audience that Blade had won and was to be congratulated. Suddenly something caught the fighter's attention. He looked away fearfully. Blade looked closer and noticed that in the haze, he spotted two human figures. The main character handed the beaten boy a yellow pill. He told Zhao to eat it and then he would be fine. After that, the protagonist looked calmly at his interlocutor and said that he could handle a retarded Blade. Yang prepared to fight and crush his main rival in the ring nicknamed Blade. The protagonist stood in front of his opponent. The audience shouted to the Blade to beat the Franklin to death. The protagonist told a fun fighter that he is a strong villain, but he is also a brainless thug. Blade was very angry. He shouted with hatred at the main character for being a bastard. The spectators in the stadium were in anticipation of a very interesting battle. The announcer shouted that a Franklin versus Bloody Blade fight is expected. She added that the audience has 3 minutes to place their bets. The audience was very excited. They were willing to bet a lot of money on the Blade. Blade angrily told his rival that he would regret being born in a few minutes. The fighter knew that the tiger had stirred drugs into the main character's water. He decided to beat the guy in the most dishonorable way possible. Yang, at this time, sipped water from a bottle. Zhao's battered boyfriend warned his new friend that his opponent was very strong. The protagonist took his credit card and threw it in the guy's direction. The protagonist told the surprised Zhao guy that he could bet the biggest bet on him winning. The girl officially announced to the audience that time was up, and betting was done. After that, the fight officially began. Blade angrily lunged at the protagonist and shouted that he would finally fight Franklin. The protagonist was completely calm. He decided to see how long his opponent could hold out against him. Blade ran full speed at his opponent. He had already said goodbye to the protagonist. The protagonist aimed his fist and prepared to strike the opponent flying at him. The guy pointed his clenched fist straight toward the belly of the fighter running at him. The protagonist punched the fighter in the gut. He didn't see it coming. After a mighty blow, the blade flew backwards and landed on the ground. The fighter didn't understand why Franklin was so strong. He remembered that the tiger was supposed to put drugs in Jan's water. The protagonist was completely calm. He said with a smile to his opponent that he was very weak. Franklin stood and looked at the seated Blade with burning demonic eyes. Blade was surprised. He realized that his opponent had extraordinary fighting skills. Blade looked at his opponent and realized that he was in the realm of innate martial arts. The spectators were not happy. They demanded that the Blade finish his opponent as soon as possible. People bet big money on the fighter. The audience shouted curses at the Blade. The protagonist told his rival that he had already become trash to his fans. The frightened fighter shouted loudly that he didn't want to die at all. The announcer shouted that Franklin was going to kill his rival. The protagonist shouted to the Blade to prepare to die. Then the protagonist swung around and hit his opponent's arm with all his might. The Blade fighter flew far to the side after the blow and fell lifeless to the floor. The audience was very frightened and excited. They didn't expect such a victory. The audience at the fight was very much taken aback. Most of them hated Clink because he lost to a weakling. The protagonist asked cheerfully, who was now the winner of the fight if he was able to hit his opponent with a slap? The announcer shouted that a fighter named Franklin was the winner. The audience shouted loudly. The announcer congratulated the guy. She said that his next opponent will be Abu. She asked the protagonist if he had anything to say. Jan Zakiril. He said he was the absolute champion today and wanted to say a few words. The main character gave a speech. He thanked the audience for loving him. Yang told the audience that this place created for gambling and profiting from people. Afterward, the main character turned around and yelled to all the guests on the podium that they were trash. The audience was not happy. They began shouting loud insults at Franklin. Tiger said with surprise that he hadn't expected Franklin to be so strong. He asked, where is this guy from? Girl Elise told the interviewer that the fighter with makeup is interesting. She added that she wanted to spend time alone with Franklin. Mr. Tiger replied to the girl that he would gladly arrange it for her. The girl turned around and started to walk away. She told the man that she would be waiting. Elise thanked Mr. Tiger. She was on her way to meet the main character. Jan was all alone in the VIP room at the time. He was expecting a meeting there. The boy couldn't understand why he was called to this room. He thought that Ling Tianhu wanted to see him in person. At this time, the doors began to open. The protagonist turned around and looked at them carefully. Jan was very excited. He realized that people had come to see him. A girl named Elise walked in, accompanied by guards. She told the protagonist that he had a great game. The girl looked at the protagonist with attention and turned to him. Franklin looked at his interlocutor with great attention and interest. Elise asked slyly at the guy, so why was he looking at her like that now? Ian took the girl by the face and told her bluntly that she looked like his wife. The protagonist remembered the name of the girl, Honshu Lin. He thought for a moment. Elise realized that her unicorn friend was able to recognize her immediately at a glance. The girl commanded the guards to leave the room and wait for her outside. The two guards immediately obeyed their mistress and left the room. Guy asked the Honshu girl where she went. He reminded her that he had been looking for her all along, and then she slammed her hand into the wall with all her might. Debris fell. Elise reminded the main character groggily that he married a Sing Yu. Elise told the guy that he started working at Shinhai Hospital for Sing Shu. The guy wanted to justify himself to his girlfriend. At that time, he was kicked in the groin by Honshu. The protagonist was hit very hard by the girl's punch. He was twisted in pain. Jan asked with pain in his voice to the girl, why on earth is she hitting his two jokers at once? Afterward, the guy emotionally replied to his girlfriend that he married a Sing Shu to find her. Elise looked at her interlocutor very incredulously. She asked again, did he really marry to find her? The protagonist emotionally replied to his girlfriend that she had gotten him completely right. Elise replied to the guy that he was lucky. She asked why, then, was Jan rubbing in the trust and entering the fight competition. The protagonist became frightened and agitated because the interviewer started asking questions. Yang, as calmly as possible, replied to the girl that he passed through here because of a Xing Shu. Elise absolutely incredulously asked the protagonist what he had said. Yang told his interlocutor that after she left him, there were many events. A Xing Shu almost died twice. The guy said that in China, Indian Brahmins spread a dangerous virus. He suspects that Ling Tianhu is behind it. So he came here and created a fake identity to infiltrate the trust. Her mood improved. She was beginning to believe the guy. Elise replied to the interviewer that she could help him. She added that she knew Ling Tianhu. She added that the man would do anything for her. Yang was surprised that girlfriend wanted to help him. He reminded girlfriend that she had always hated his Sing Shu. Elise replied that it was like that. Elise clarified that she still doesn't like Shu to this day. She added, however, that she continues to love the main character. She explained that she was only helping the guy to make him happy. Jan was surprised that there was such a girl in this world who could love him so much. The protagonist was very overwhelmed with emotion. He turned to a woman named Honshu. The girl told the main character to call her the Dragon Group. The others called her Miss Alice. The announcer announced that superboxer Abu was coming to the ring. He had won 100 consecutive victories by knockout. The announcer announced that rival Franklin will be going up against Abu. The protagonist was in a cheerful mood. He looked at his opponent with surprise. The spectators were very excited. They demanded that the fighter finish his opponent. Girl Alice looked at the main character and thought he was as unserious as ever. The girlfriend told the unicorn that if he defeated Abu within 10 rounds, she would give him a bonus. Ian asked his girlfriend, what happens if he wins for 3 rounds? Alice replied that if her friend won, she would do whatever he wanted. The protagonist was very excited by such a word from a girl. He was horny. Ian saw himself hugging his girlfriend and telling her to be ready to fulfill his whims. The protagonist was excited and anticipating how his girlfriend would thank him. Franklin looked intently at his acquaintance, who stood with her back to him. The excited protagonist shouted to his rival to get under his skin. He added that he had a girl waiting for him. Qiang looked at the fighter and got worried. He realized that his opponent was very dangerous. The protagonist saw what appeared to be the silhouette of a ravenous bear appear behind the fighter Abu. The announcer excitedly said that the battle had begun. The fighters rushed at each other. Abu lunged viciously at his opponent. He wanted to finish Franklin right away. The protagonist was completely calm. He waited until the opponent's fist came close to him. After that, the chief City with his hand grabbed Abu's fist and prevented his opponent from striking. Qiang turned to Abu Yi, called him an old friend. He added that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The fighter was very surprised. He asked Franklin how does he know him. The protagonist told his rival that they had met and fought together in the land of W. He recalled how the two of them once stood together on the mountain of defeated opponents. The announcer said that the fighters were speaking in Russian. She told the excited viewers that it was the first time she had seen such a thing. At this time, fighter Abu was remembering the country W. He recalled the incident when they were standing on a pile of corpses. The fighter became agitated. He looked at his opponent and began to remember something. Abu looked at the guy and remembered that the one was once called the War King and the Bloody Unicorn. Qiang told his interlocutor that if he remembered him, they could settle everything quietly. He added that Abu should not die in the underground ring. The best death for him would be to die on the battlefield, like a true hero. The fighter was very angry. He swung around to hit the protagonist. Franklin was completely calm. He dodged a punch to the side just in time. A very powerful shot ended in nothing, and Abu ended up hitting the wall. The protagonist told his rival to better team up with him. He offered to tear up the underground ring together. The fighter swung once more. Jan was able to dodge in time. Franklin told his opponent to give up and he can't beat him. Abu looked at his opponent and realized that Franklin's strength was much more powerful than it had been 3 years ago. A warrior shouted that his wife had been killed by thugs. He took revenge and killed more than 100 people. Abu added that he would not be able to return to the country W. Abu angrily shouted that he would not be able to see his daughter Eva. He added that he needed money. A fighter shouted loudly that he needed money to get his daughter Eva out of the country W where the war continues. Abu then once again swung around to hit his opponent. The protagonist put his arms out and was able to block a very strong blow. Abu continued to attack his opponent. Franklin defended himself and did not allow himself to be hit. The fighter told his opponent that if he wanted to be his boss, he had to beat him. Abu looked menacingly at the protagonist and shouted for him to attack. The protagonist realized he had to fight to the end now. Jan looked at his opponent and said he would win the battle and then he would help Abu. Abu shouted at the guy and demanded that he forget that they were once partners. The fighter shouted that he didn't need help or mercy from the Yan. After that, the fighter pounced on his opponent and tried to hit him with his fists. The announcer informed the audience that the fighter Abu was called the King of the Fist for a reason. The announcer added that Abu has only a few more worthy opponents in the whole world. The announcer then informed the viewers that the main character has impressive but useless moves. She added that Qiang doesn't respond with a punch to a punch. The protagonist was very adept at dodging the blows his opponent threw at him. Franklin realized that his opponent was still as good as ever. Qiang prepared to activate his special skills. He thought that Abu had forced him to use one of his trump cards. After that, the protagonist prepared to attack. He kicked off his foot and ran at his opponent. Ian swung his arm with all his might and prepared to strike his opponent. Franklin was fully focused. He was determined to deliver a crushing blow. The protagonist reached maximum acceleration to put all the power into his punch. Franklin then managed to hit his opponent with a fist bump. Abu's fighter was knocked to the side by a powerful punch. He didn't have time to defend himself. The battered Abu was lying on the floor. Stones that had fallen from the wall were lying around him. The undefeated Abu fighter realized that he had completely lost this time. Abu decided not to hold back any longer, and he bowed to his opponent. The protagonist was in a fighting stance. He won thanks to a special skill. A doctor ran up and said that Abu had no signs of life and he was pronouncing death. The audience was very much amazed. They could not believe that the protagonist was able to defeat Abu with one blow. The people in the stands were shocked. They couldn't believe that their undefeated idol was now dead. Mr. Tiger was stunned. He couldn't believe that the Abu fighter was no longer alive. The man realized that the protagonist had reached the boundary of the guru stage. Such cultivators would enter the realm of innate martial arts. Tiger-san couldn't understand why a guru-level fighter had come to the underground ring. The man then ordered his subordinate to bring Franklin to him at all costs, and to gather any information he could about the boy. The subordinate replied that he would do so. Elise thought thoughtfully to herself that the unicorn's power had become even more powerful. The announcer called out that Franklin was the winner of the melee. The entire audience cheered the champion. The protagonist saw his girlfriend on the balcony and greeted her with a gesture. The girl gave her friend a sly look and realized that she had to fulfill what she had promised him. The protagonist excitedly heard a group of men heading towards him from the side. The guy was wary. He had absolutely no idea why someone was coming to see him now. One of the thugs told Franklin that their boss had offered to go and have a cup of tea with him. After that, the man sternly commanded the protagonist to follow them. There were a lot of militants standing around. Alice asked Mr. Tiger what was going on. The man replied that because of Franklin, they had almost lost their betting income. He also added that the main character had killed his fighter Abu. The man explained that he owed a lot of money for defeating Abu. He also demanded that Alice not interfere, or she would get into trouble. The girl did not like such threats. She asked the man if he was really threatening her with trouble. Yang asked his interlocutor as calmly as possible, "Does their boss want to have tea with him?" Franklin looked at the man calmly, and said that he drank the water provided to him before the fight, so he doesn't want to have tea with the boss. The bandit was angry. He spit out his cigarette and told his interlocutor to get ready. The bandit yelled to the protagonist that they were all about to feed him bullets. The bandits drew their weapons. The gunman started threatening the guy that they would shoot him if he tried to move. Yang grudgingly told his enemies that there was no way they could learn simple things. The militant leader was surprised to notice that Franklin had disappeared instantly. The man was very frightened. He felt that the protagonist was somewhere close by. Jan suddenly appeared in front of the ringleader and asked cheerfully, who was the faster of the two? The ringleader angrily shouted to his subordinates not to stand, but to shoot at the protagonist. The bandits were very excited and scared. They turned to their boss. The gunmen showed the leader their weapons. They melted and could not fire anymore. Mr. Tiger was very surprised. He realized that the main character used special skills. One of his subordinates told the ringleader that the course of events had gone beyond what he had foreseen. Elise thought happily to herself that the militants wanted to hurt her favorite guy, but ended up getting her in trouble. The tiger commanded his subordinates to close the doors. He added that it would not be easy to defeat Franklin. Every door in the neighborhood was closed. Every exit for the protagonist was blocked. Ian found himself all alone in the great field, surrounded by bandits. Franklin stood completely alone. Armed gunmen stood on all sides around him. One of the bandits took out a knife and told the protagonist cheerfully that he wouldn't leave here alive today. The leader commanded his fighters that they should now attack together. Young impatiently told his opponents to attack him together. It would save a lot of time. The ringleader shouted to his subordinates to kill the protagonist as soon as possible. Suddenly there was a noise from above. A helicopter was approaching the building. People looked up. The glass shattered and an armed girl burst into the building on a rope. An armed policewoman held onto the rope and prepared to descend to the floor. After that, the girl jumped down and prepared to intervene in the carnage. Nalanya said cheerfully to everyone here that they were having fun and she wanted to join them. The protagonist was surprised that Sun Nalan had come to his rescue. He shouted to the girl that he hadn't signaled her yet. The policewoman angrily reminded the guy of the order that had been given from the beginning. Yang thought fearfully to himself that Ling Tianhu was about to run away. The guy looked up and saw a grenade falling. The policewoman angrily asked her interlocutor where he was looking now. The protagonist sharply commanded the girl to lie down. He grabbed her by the shoulders. The policewoman looked away fearfully. She had no time to say anything to her interlocutor. The girl saw a huge number of battle grenades falling on them. There was a very big explosion. Everything around was destroyed and engulfed in fire. The leader was fleeing on a boat at the time. Mr. Tiger told disgruntled subordinates that they lost a $10 million casino today. The subordinate said Franklin now dead, and they successfully escaped. The man said they were covered by a Megundo. She probably couldn't get away. At this time, Mr. Tiger threw his cigar aside and said that he had already made due use of the girl. He added that he would be able to find an assistant. Afterward, the leader told his subordinates that he still had a girl named Alice with him. Mr. Tiger looked at his girlfriend standing on the deck. He added that he could earn the lost money back. A luxury yacht sailed the ocean and carried its passengers further and further away. A man with a glass in his hand told Alice that he was apologizing for killing the boy she loved. The girl sat on the sofa. Mr. Tiger told his interlocutor that he looked forward to their continued cooperation. The girl calmly replied to the man about their future cooperation. Then Alice presented a golden pistol to the frightened man's head and said that everything would change drastically. The subordinates were very scared for their leader. They decided to rush to his aid, at which time Alice's guards disarmed the bandits very quickly and professionally. Alice demanded of the man that he give the name of the man who had shot his Sigsu. The man was still under the gun. He said angrily, "Alice is an undercover police rat." The girl angrily demanded of Mr. Tiger to answer her question. The man said in response to his interlocutor that if he were to die, it would be with her. At that time, a flying metal disc appeared. It flew up from below and caught the man a little. Alice looked fearfully at the disc flying at her. She was frightened. The disc flew past the girl and she let the gun out of her hands at the same time. The man grabbed his gun and said to himself grudgingly that he had almost been killed by a policewoman. Mr. Tiger pointed his gun at the girl. He said angrily she had a frightened little face. After that, Mr. Tiger pointed his gun at the girl and prepared to shoot her. Alice was very frightened. Mr. Tiger fired his gun straight at the girl's head. The bullet went right through. The man cheerfully told the dead Alice that her corpse would remain intact. Suddenly, Tiger-san saw the residual silhouette of the girl he had just killed appear in the air in front of him. Suddenly, a fully alive Alice appeared from the side. She grabbed the man by the shoulders. Alice said menacingly to her interlocutor that he really underestimates girls. The man was very much astonished. He couldn't help but believe that the girl was still alive. Alice then grabbed the ringleader and threw him over herself with a powerful wrestling hold. Mr. Tiger flew far to the side after a powerful throw from the girl. The man hit the table with a thud after flying. He dropped his gun. Mr. Tiger was frightened. He decided to try and grab his weapon. Alice yelled to her opponent that he was moving very slowly. She prepared to kick him. The girl kicked Mr. Tiger's head with all her might. The ringleader was completely disarmed. He could no longer fight off the girl. Alice pointed the gun at the ringleader and demanded that he answer all her questions. Mr. Tiger, with consternation, asked the interlocutor, "Who is she?" And then there was a huge explosion on the luxury yacht. There were very few people who could have survived. The main character was in the building of a huge stadium. There were people there, and they were screaming to be rescued. The audience was really freaked out. One guy couldn't believe he was still alive. The protagonist told the policewoman after he'd caught his breath that he was a risky guy. Nalan looked at young Yunfan with astonishment. She realized that he was about to save them all. The protagonist, at the most dangerous moment, gathered his energy and formed a huge shield to protect people. Yang had his strength exceeded the innate martial arts realm and guru level. The main character was walking down the hallway towards the bar. He was all alone. The police eventually arrested everyone involved in illegal gambling. Law enforcers have captured the dangerous ringleader Ling Tianhu. He was detained on a drifting yacht. The main character was thinking about his missing girlfriend. He went up to the third floor to the boss's break room. The guy walked into the room and noticed he wasn't alone. He was very surprised. On the bed sat his acquaintance in a seductive outfit. The girl told the unicorn that she was already very much waiting. Yang was very much astonished. He asked excitedly to Hong Shuling, "What is she doing here?" The interviewee was sitting in a seductive outfit. She told the guy that she had lost the bet and had to pay the debt. The main character thought to himself joyfully and excitedly that today he was finally going to be a big boy. The girl pulled up the stockings on her legs. The guy was watching her very closely. The protagonist felt very highly aroused. It was as if he flew off to the side. The girl asked Yan with excitement and interest if he was okay. The main character was still very much aroused. He couldn't answer anything. The interlocutor affectionately told the guy that he had a fetish for pretty girls in stockings. The girl looked at the protagonist and called him a lecher without malice. After that, Honshu stretched out her legs to the protagonist. Yang was very much aroused. The protagonist felt as if his golden cockerel was waking up. Ian pounced on his girlfriend and yelled that she was very pretty today. Honshu told the very excited protagonist to wait and take his time. The female companion said they had plenty of time. She looked at the guy and told him to wait. The girl headed for the shower. Ian was very unhappy because girlfriend first turned him on and then left him. He decided to turn on the TV to distract himself a bit. The main character decided to take a little sip of water from a bottle while he watched TV. There was some program on TV. A girl was singing joyfully that she was like a butterfly. The main character was amazed when he saw the program. He even spit out water out of surprise. A man appeared on the screen. He excitedly started singing that his girlfriend was a log, after which the man and his girlfriend bumped each other's ass. The TV presenter happily announced that the contest has a new champion. Ian was very dissatisfied. He wanted to distract himself, and after watching television, he got more aroused. Honshu was in the shower. She asked the protagonist, did he really decide to watch porn movies instead of her? The main character decided to turn off the TV real quick. He yelled to his girlfriend that he only gets horny on her, and then the girlfriend got out of the shower. The protagonist even dropped the bottle with the drink. Ian gazed uninterruptedly with a very aroused look at his girlfriend. Honshu was wearing a medical suit. She asked romantically to the guy, isn't she beautiful to him? The protagonist stood and stared at his girlfriend in silence. He was mesmerized by her appearance. Honshu looked at the guy and asked why he was silent and did he really think she was ugly. Ian hugged his girlfriend and told her affectionately that to him she was the most beautiful. The girl was silent. She looked at the protagonist very testily. Honshu said grudgingly to her interlocutor, men always think with what's in their pants. The girl said grudgingly to her friend that if she hadn't dressed up like a doll, he wouldn't have wanted her. The main character got really excited. He wanted to say something to his girlfriend. She interrupted him. Honshu told her interlocutor that he may not have to explain himself. She added that she likes him, she won't regret helping him. The girl told the interviewer that she loved him and had been thinking about him for the past 3 months. Honshu told her interlocutor that she missed his voice and longed for him to say something softly to her. The main character grabbed his girlfriend and kissed her. He said he would take responsibility. The girl told the protagonist not to say anything and just kiss her. After that, the main character stayed with his girlfriend Honshu in a kiss. The night flew by quickly. The bird said in surprise that the shaking building was a lot of fun. The protagonist woke up in the morning. He was still remembering his girlfriend. Through the dream, he called her name. Suddenly, the protagonist heard something suspicious. He jumped up sharply on the bed. Jan looked outside and saw that the sun was shining brightly. He decided to look for his beloved. The guy remembered romantically to himself that Honshu had been very passionate last night. Ian thought happily to himself that the girl was a little embarrassed, and so she hid in the bathroom. The protagonist quietly got out of bed and very quietly strode towards the restroom. Then the guy grabbed the handle to the toilet stall with his hand and carefully opened it. Ian Nude ran into the bathroom and shouted a greeting to his girlfriend. The protagonist was very frightened. He noticed his acquaintance sitting in the toilet stall, frightened. The guy was really scared. He covered his hands and called the main character boss. The main character ended up landing right on top of his acquaintance after jumping. A startled Yang asked the guy what he was doing here, and where did his girlfriend Honshu Lin go. The guy frightenedly explained that the girl had left early in the morning. She asked him to wake up Jan. The guy was very scared. He didn't understand why his friend walked in at the exact moment when he was in the toilet. The main character felt displeased. He didn't understand why the girl left without saying goodbye. The interlocutor told the protagonist that the girl left something before she left. After that, the guy handed the main character a letter from his girlfriend Honshu. The girl texted the guy that she was leaving to do some tasks. She added that she had gotten some information from Ling Tianhu. The protagonist read the letter carefully. He remembered himself, the secret man. The guy shouted very angrily to his enemy that he was doomed to die. There was a party at a luxury villa. There were many guests and security guards. The guy told his friends that the rich people had asked them to be his bodyguard. He added that with such security measures, not even a fly would enter the place. The fighter was telling his friends that being rich is a very good thing. You can have fun with beautiful models in a country villa. The main character appeared on the fence from above. One of the guards angrily asked, "Who is there?" Ian jumped on top and disarmed the bodyguards. He called them little episode actors. On the 3rd floor, the guy Shu Minyu was angrily chatting with a girl. He grudgingly asked, "How much money does she need to put away her stubbornness?" The female interlocutor fearfully asked Mr. Shu to let her go. Shu Minyu told the girl that she might cry. He added that he likes it when whores cry. The girl screamed fearfully for someone to rescue her. The boy reached for her. Shu Ming shouted angrily to the interlocutor that he was more turned on. After her shouting, he stretched out his arms towards her. When the girl was startled, she slapped the guy's hand on his chest. She hurt him. Zhu Min was very angry. He shouted at the interviewer for scratching her breasts. The girl was very frightened. She apologized to the guy in a trembling voice. Zhu Min then swung around to hit the girl. He shouted that there is no forgiveness for whores. The girl continued to beg for forgiveness. After the violent blow, the interlocutor lay frightened on the bed. She was still begging for help. The guy angrily shouted to the interlocutor that he was interested in her since she looked a lot like a Xingxu. At this time, some man nearby patted the guy's shoulder and said that energy was whipping out of Zhui. The guy was very displeased. He turned around and asked the stranger who he was. In the room stood young Master Kenjiro Ishikawa, accompanied by his subordinates. He was dressed in a robe and had a sword at his belt. The master said thoughtfully to his interlocutor that women are as delicate as a flower. Afterward, the man put his hand on the guy's shoulder and told him to be gentle with women. The guy roughly threw away his interlocutor's hand and said, "Master Ishikawa came at a bad time." The guy asked the man unhappily, "Why does the man interrupt him?" He added that he was in China giving a huge space for the man's business. The girl at this time ran away, frightened. Shu asked the master, where is the professional ninja he promised him? He added that Yang Yunfeng was probably on his way to this place by now. The guy then told the man that he would kick him out of China, and he would no longer be able to do business in that country. The doors opened, and the main character walked in. He asked the man and the guy, do they really want to make an assassination attempt on him? The guy was very much astonished. He couldn't believe that Yang Yunfeng had arrived here so quickly. The master was surprised that the protagonist was able to enter this place without the slightest noise. He remembered the words of the Brahmins who said that Yang Yunfeng was an unusual person. The master recalled how his interlocutor had told him that Yang Yunfeng had been able to disarm the deadly virus. He was also able to sneak into Ling Qianhu's hideout and arrest him. The man thought they had collaborated with Indian Brahmins to steal China's national treasure called Shariru. He decided that now the Chinese could deal with their own problems. Zhu's boyfriend laughed evilly. He said that the main character came to him by himself. The guy grabbed the gun out of his robe and yelled for someone to come to his aid. Zhu held the gun in his hands. He shouted to his subordinates they gave him the death of the protagonist. Zhu's boyfriend was standing in front of the protagonist and holding a gun. He prepared to shoot. Suddenly the boy felt a thrill. He was waiting for help to arrive. Zhu couldn't figure out where his subordinates had gone. He thought the militants were watching porn again. The protagonist calmly told his interlocutor not to worry about his men. The protagonist then pointed out to his enemy all the dead militants of the day. Zhu was very frightened. His hands were trembling. He realized that he would have to fight by himself. The guy pointed a gun at the protagonist and said he'd shoot him if he took one step in his direction. The protagonist answered the guy absolutely calmly that bullets were absolutely useless against him. Zhu was afraid. He realized that bullets would be useless against Yang. The guy menacingly called Master Ishikawa over to him and demanded that he go to him and help him kill the protagonist. The guy promised the mastermind that if he killed the protagonist, he'd give him all his family businesses. The man replied to the lad that during a single samurai duel, no one should interfere. Zue angrily asked the man where had his thoughts of setting up a Japanese business in China gone. The man replied to the guy that with his business assignments in China, he could make his dream come true on his own. He added that he hopes to see Shui alive after the fight. The main character stood at the door. He looked at the man. Yang thought that Master and Shui Min cooperated a lot together. Yang was surprised that the Master, after a long time of cooperation, had just cut ties with Shui Mi Yu so easily. The protagonist wondered. He couldn't figure out what the Japanese guy's real intentions might be. Shu yelled at the master for being ungrateful. He had done so much for him and Ishikawa just walked away. The protagonist looked at his rival and said they needed to settle the score with each other. The guy was really scared. He realized he couldn't just overpower Yang himself. The guy asked in a trembling voice for the protagonist to wait. He said that's not how business is done. Zhu dropped to his knees in front of the protagonist and said to solve everything with words. The guy shouted at his interlocutor to forgive him and promised him a lot of money in return. Yang said sternly to the guy to answer the questions. He asked why Shui wanted to kill the girl Li Xingxue. The guy explained in a frightened voice that he had a lapse of judgment. He added that he acknowledged his mistake. The guy angrily thought to himself that he wanted to kill Xing Shu because she had fallen in love with the protagonist instead of him. He decided to let no one else have the girl. Zhu fell down in a bow and asked that the protagonist magnanimously let him get away with everything. To himself, the guy thought to himself that while he still had a chance to escape, he decided that he would kill Yan next time with reinforcements. The protagonist told his interlocutor calmly that he would spare his life this time. Ian looked menacingly at the guy and demanded that he tell him he was mentally retarded. Zhu was very much surprised. He didn't expect such a strange request for himself. After that, the protagonist reached out and grabbed his opponent. Ian knocked the guy to the floor with a swing and shouted that a retard should have the appropriate look. After a strong blow to the floor, the Shu guy lost consciousness. He was completely disarmed. The protagonist headed towards the exit of the room. His opponent was lying near a large dent in the floor. Ian told himself that he had to make sure the bad guys never had a chance to be like that again. The SUE guy began to gradually come to his senses. He raised his head and looked around. The guy started looking around in surprise with a crazed look. He was completely unhinged. The girl with the fan said the main character didn't kill Shu Min-yu's boyfriend. The girl prepared to draw her sword. She said that Yang was able to turn her enemy into a fool with just one blow. After that, the girl jumped up and swung her sword. The guy was sitting there mumbling something crazy to himself. The girl rushed over and chopped the guy's head off. He didn't realize it. After that, the girl angrily shouted that she wanted to chop off Zhu's head herself as well. After that, a mass meeting was held at the Sue family home. People came to attend the guy's funeral. The guy was beautifully ennobled and lay in a coffin wearing white clothes. The head of the household named Shui Qiangdong asked his subordinates, "Have they found the boy's killer?" The subordinate said that they investigated. He told the head of the household that the guy had a conflict with the main character because of the girl Yi Xing-shu. It is suspected that the killer is Yang Yunfang. The man asked angrily, did the Yang family break the agreement and now act against their Su family? After that, the head commanded his subordinates to send someone from his sect to capture the main character. The man said angrily that he would make Yan beg for death. The subordinates replied that they would definitely fulfill everything. At that time, the main character was walking down a city street. He was holding a huge number of boxes in his hands. The guy grudgingly told his companion named Miss E that he was already dying of fatigue. The girl reminded her companion that he had promised to accompany her shopping. Protagonist asked by his companion former Abu fighter, why isn't he helping them with the packages? Abu calmly replied to the protagonist that he is the bodyguard of Miss E. The protagonist reminded the fighter that he had helped him fake his own death. Then Yang was able to get Abu out of Ling Tianhu's custody. Now the fighter is in a fancy job and getting decent money. The guy angrily asked the former rival fighter, why is he taking the side of his enemy? Miss E stood aside. She was amused to hear her companions arguing among themselves. At that time, someone's footsteps sounded from outside. Someone was coming towards the girl sharply. A stranger in black glasses jumped a girl. She almost ran her over. The protagonist arrived just in time. He grabbed Xing-shu in his arms and asked fearfully if she was okay. The girl calmed down and said that nothing had happened, and it was just that a stranger had fallen and hit her. Xing-shu looked at her fallen interlocutor and said her name was Lesser Yao. The protagonist asked his girlfriend in surprise, does she really know the stranger? Xing-shu replied cheerfully, Les Yao is a big celebrity. Xing-shu happily revealed that the stranger began her career as an actress. It is not uncommon for her to be called the most beautiful girl in Southeast Asia. Lesser Yao is the idol of many men in the country. Ian replied to his girlfriend that he didn't understand who it was, as he had been isolated on the mountain for most of his life. The girlfriend told the protagonist that the actress left show business 3 years ago for an indefinite period of time after an accident. At that time, a huge number of reporters ran up. They started taking pictures of the actress and shouting that she was here. The actress was very much frightened by the people who ran up. She turned around and covered herself with her hands. The photographers were unhappy because they didn't have time to photograph the actress's disfigured face. They wanted to make a lot of money out of it. At that time, there was a small explosion and the cameras were blown apart. The photographers were surprised. They did not understand what had happened. The girl Xing-shu ran up to the actress Meng Yao and decided to help her up. The main character told the strictly photographers that he was sick of people like them. The photographers were very angry. They wanted to beat up the main character. One of them shouted that the broken camera was very expensive and demanded compensation for the damage. Another photographer said that the guy looked familiar to him. He added that it was better not to mess with this doctor. The photographer angrily shouted that he wanted to send the protagonist to a hospital bed. At that time, Abu's guard appeared in front of the men. He was very angry and looked menacingly at his frightened interlocutors. After that, the photographers were very frightened and decided to make a quick getaway. Ian handed the actress her headpiece and asked her if she was okay. The girl frightenedly asked her interlocutor, what kind of hospital does divine Dr. Yang work at? The main character along with his friends were very surprised. They looked at the actress with interest. The next day, the mutilated girl was transferred to the hospital. There she was assisted by the main character. Reporters asked Dr. Yang how much chance of success the surgery had. Someone asked the guy, why was he chosen by Miss Les Yao and how does he want to treat her? The protagonist felt bored by the questions. Yang replied to the media workers that he would treat the girl with Chinese medicine. A reporter said that the girl Meng Yao was burned to the bone. He added that such an injury could not be cured by Chinese medicine. The reporter replied to the reporter that Dr. Yang is the best around. He recalled that the main character had recently dealt with a dangerous virus. The protagonist told the patient it was time and asked if she was ready. Les Yao asked the guy if he could restore her appearance. He replied to the patient that he would restore her appearance and make her even more beautiful. He added that they would have to refrain from taking anesthesia. The guy told the girl to prepare herself psychologically. The main character took a rope and told the girl that he would tie her hands so she wouldn't accidentally scratch her face. The guy told the patient that he would put something in her mouth during the procedure so she wouldn't bite her tongue. The girl agreed. Before that, Jan called an acquaintance and asked him to buy a rubber stick that could be put in his mouth. The guy handed the head hero a box with the required object. The main character opened the box and was very much amazed by the rubber object. He realized that his friend had misunderstood him. A patient asked the doctor, "What's wrong?" The guy replied that everything was fine. He decided to improvise. The patient asked with interest, "Why is the rubber thing so hard?" The doctor replied reassuringly and excitedly that there was nothing he could do about it. The protagonist began his magical manipulations. He explained to the patient that she needed to endure something now. Yang explained that the basis of the treatment was special maggots from southern Xinjiang. He poured them from the jug into his hand. Then the protagonist put special maggots on the girl's face. Yang explained that the larvae are harmless to humans inside human blood. They will die, and then their corpses will turn into solid calcium. The guy explained that the treatment would result in the facial bone defects being completely repaired. He added that no anesthesia should be administered during the procedure. Jan explained to the patient that during the treatment process, the patient requires tremendous willpower and a lot of patience. The girl felt intense pain, but she held back her screams. Jan told the patient that everything now depended on her. 3 hours later, the actress was taken out of the hospital door. She was very weak. The people outside the hospital were astonished. They saw that the patient's face was still disfigured. Someone shouted that even the divine doctor could not cure the patient. After which one of the girls ran up to the actress and touched her face with her hand. The reporter noticed that the actress's face was outlined with some red substance. The TV reporters were surprised. They realized that everything was a prank. The actress told the cheerful people that she had not traded her acting skills for 3 years. Les Yao said that after her facial trauma, her life went downhill. There were a lot of bad things written about her on the internet. The reporter told the actress that her comeback is the best counterattack ever. She added that the haters can now admit they are wrong. Meng Yao told reporters that although she is healed physically, she will not be able to heal her mental trauma. The actress said that haters never admit they are wrong. They can only write a few comforting words to the victim. Lesser Yao told excited reporters that haters will always go looking for the next victim. The girl told the audience that whether she was beautiful or not, she would take responsibility for her own life. People shouted joyfully to the girl that she was even more beautiful than before. People ran and started looking for the main character. Each of them had health problems and wanted the help of the divine doctor. The protagonist walked out on the other side of the hospital and told himself that he preferred to be a quiet, handsome man. The media reported that the former all-China actress Meng Yao returns after extraction. The news reported that the actress became even more graceful after the treatment. The protagonist was in the basement socializing with his new arrivals. The protagonist told his companions that he had prepared some spiritual pills for them. He added that the boys should eat the pills, and their true power would be increased as a result. The guy asked the main character with interest, "Are there any power classifications for the spirit realms?" Yang explained to his companion all the cultivation levels. He added that there were 9 floors in each realm. The main character explained what happens to a cultivator when he goes to different realms. Yang said that once a cultivator entered the Juji realm, he would become the truest first-class master in the mortal world. Such a person would be able to arrange terrible things tomorrow and end the existence of a small country. The guests cheerfully shouted that there was nothing to wait for, and they began to swallow the pills. The guy asked with interest to his boss, "What level is he on now?" The protagonist thought to himself that he was going to break through to the 4th floor of Yinqi. He thought that if he wanted to break through the borders as soon as possible, only the dragon grass of southern Xinjiang would help him. The protagonist picked up the phone and decided to call an acquaintance. The guy cheerfully asked his familiar police Nalanya how she was doing. The girl said that she had learned important information. The main goal of Ling Tianhu and the Indian Brahmins was to spread the virus and steal the national Chinese treasure from a Buddhist temple during the general hype. The protagonist asked in surprise, what did the kidnappers want to do with the Sharira? Nalan explained that the cherished Sharira is evidence of the attainment by one sage of the immortal golden body of truth. Such a body is similar to the supreme nature of the Buddha's body. The girl reported that according to legend, if a person practicing the Tao touches the Sharira, he or she will be able to cultivate for hundreds of years. The policewoman added that the theft had been long and carefully planned. The policewoman said excitedly that there was information that Indian Brahmins might try to return to their homeland through illegal border crossing. She asked the protagonist for help in this task. Nalan added that the national treasure of China must not fall into other hands. The next day, the main character arrived at the big train station. There were a lot of people there. Ian remembered that the Indians were leaving the country in a week. In that time, he needed to find dragon grass. The guy got the root. He told him to point him in the right direction. The guy looked at the root. It had the same properties as the spiritual herb. For the same reason, he uses this ancient ginseng root as a compass. He will use it to find the location of the dragon grass. After a brief pause, the root confidently showed the direction for the lad to the south. The protagonist has arrived in Mountain City. Southern Xinjiang is near the Chinese border. Further south is Mountain Aren. He decided that he would get a little extra benefit on this journey. A stranger approached. He asked the guy, "Does he need a bus?" Jan replied, surprised that the man had once duped him for money. The old man asked the guy in surprise, "What is he talking about?" The protagonist thought excitedly that the man in front of him was not the one who had cheated him out of his money. The stranger told the guy that he could get indescribable emotions when traveling in the mountains. He proceeded to board the bus to experience a mental shake. Ian excitedly told himself that the old man had offered him a daring ride. He imagined himself together with the girl on the seat. The protagonist asked the man if there would be any hidden security threats on the bus, and the acquaintance said that their driver was very experienced with a long record. The main character was riding in a bus on a very bad road. There were rocks and potholes everywhere. The bad road was throwing the guy all over the bus. He was uncomfortable. An elderly driver was telling the passengers that they were going to the mountains and there would be a lot of rocks on the road. He asked everyone to wear seat belts. The protagonist felt the bumps on his head. He cursed the old man who had tricked him. A girl named Han Chiki approached the driver. She asked the driver to stop at the intersection in front as she needed to get off there. The passengers looked at the girl with great admiration and desire. Someone shouted that Han Chiki had large breasts. The protagonist thought rather to himself that the guys next to him had no combat experience. The two passengers sat side by side and looked at the girl with malicious interest. Ian thought to himself grudgingly, strangers on a bus against a girl plotting mischief. A passenger got off the bus. Guys surrounded her and started hitting on her. The stranger shouted to the girl that she had an expensive watch. It meant that she was very rich. He demanded that the passenger give him the watch and he would definitely let her go. The girl smiled evilly at the guy and called him a scoundrel. She decided to teach the bullies a lesson, whereupon the stranger, with quick movements of her head, struck the lads down with strokes of her yellow hair. The girl had yellow pigtails with heavy metal coins at the end of them. Yang patted the stranger and said that her trick was called scorpion waving its tail. He thought to himself that the girl was a high-level spiritual disciple from the mountain. The stranger became agitated. She couldn't understand how the main character had passed that she hadn't even noticed him. Girl got into a fighting stance and asked Ian, "Is he really in place?" The main character calmly replied to the interlocutor that he was just an ordinary passerby. He followed the girl to help her at the right moment. The beaten hooligans prepared to flee the scene. The girl angrily asked the strangers, what were they thinking before they attacked her? The protagonist asked with interest to the girl, did she let the bullies off so easily? The interviewee calmly tidied up and said that they lived in a legal society. The girl winked at the protagonist and said that the wolves would smell the prey and there would be a lot of yelling in the evening. The protagonist was frightened. He thought to himself excitedly that there was a scary woman in front of him. The girl told the protagonist that he had better go down the mountain to avoid the teeth of the wild wolves. She prepared to leave. The protagonist told his new acquaintance his name. He asked the girl to tell him where the nearest hotel was. The female companion asked the guy in surprise, is he really the divine Dr. Yang Yunfan that was talked about in the news? The protagonist was surprised that even some village knew about him. The girl reminded the protagonist that he had healed a famous Mengyao actress. She asked her interlocutor, did he really think that the people of the southern mountains lived in total isolation without television and the internet? The girl handed the guy a business card. She said her name was Han Kiki. Her family owns a pharmaceutical company. She invited the protagonist to become its representative. Suddenly, gunshots were heard from outside. The protagonist was very frightened. The protagonist rushed the girl and tackled her to the ground to protect her from gunfire. Khan found herself lying on the ground with the protagonist on top of her. The girl stood up and angrily demanded that the guy move away from her. Jan thought cheerfully to himself that his new acquaintance's breasts were worth risking his back. Suddenly, a wounded soldier named Ludong ran out of the woods. The protagonist, along with his girlfriend, were surprised. They couldn't understand what kind of soldier was here. Ian looked at the fighter and realized he was probably being chased. The guy said he was a doctor and offered to treat the stranger's wounds. The soldier shoved the guy back with his hand and shouted loudly for him to run. There was a gunshot from behind. Someone was trying to finish the fighter off. Another bullet hit the soldier and went right through him. Masked pursuers appeared. They surrounded the protagonist. Jan held the soldier's body in his arms. The main character was standing with his girlfriend and a wounded soldier. There were strangers with masks and guns around. The man excitedly explained that their opponents could not be defeated. They were going to be killed by the Indians. He explained that his pursuers would not leave him alive as a witness. One of the masked gunmen shouted to the soldier that he was dreaming. He got ready to shoot. At this time, a whole flock of bamboo needles suddenly flew from somewhere from the side. The poisoned needles hit the heads of the fighters. They all dropped dead. Yang told himself that he had wasted his needles. He pulled one out of the man's head and said it could still be used for decontamination. The soldier and the girl were frightened. They thought the main character was a very ruthless man. The main character decided to help the wounded soldier. Jan told the man excitedly that he had almost been hit in the chest by a bullet. The soldier replied that with a gunshot wound he should go to the hospital. The protagonist told his new acquaintance not to worry. He pressed his fingers on the skin next to the bullet. After a hard push from the protagonist, the bullet flew out of the soldier's body. The man was very surprised that the guy kicked the bullet out of him with his bare hands and he didn't even feel any pain. The girl reported that the help was provided by Yang Yunfeng, who is called the Divine Doctor. Jan gave the soldier some grass and told him to chew it and then put it where the bullet had been. The protagonist realized that there might be wolves and other wild animals around, so he had to be wary. The man was surprised at how the guy quickly kicked the bullet out of him. He decided that his new acquaintance was very unusual. A man gave the protagonist his name. He said that his border detachment had discovered Indian secret agents. They had pursued him and wounded him. The soldier Liu asked that the guy come down the mountain and report the incident to the police and ask for backup. The protagonist asked his interlocutor how many Indians were against him. Liu replied that at least 20 men had shot at him in the ambush, of whom 16 or 17 should have remained. Young thought he had come to southern Xinjiang to retrieve the cherished Sharira. But the unforeseen happened because of the appearance of Indian secret agents, so he must postpone the extraction of dragon grass for later. The main character gave a thumbs up and said he hates the Japanese the most. After that, he hates the Indians. The protagonist told the soldier that he would go with him to rescue his brothers. In the meantime, the girl Hankiki must go down and report to the police. The soldier was excited. He realized that the protagonist was just an ordinary man. The guy hurried the man. He said that if you were late, you could lose a lot of good friends. Soldier Liu thanked the protagonist and handed him his gun. The main character said with a cryptic smile that he doesn't use guns. The protagonist and a man were descending carefully from the mountains. They noticed a cave in the rock. One of the Indians said that the Chinese border guards were cowards, and they hid in the caves. Another fighter demanded that the border guards come out. The soldier shouted angrily that he was ready to sacrifice his life to tear off the tongues of the Hindus. John told the man not to be frivolous and not to fall for the tricks. The protagonist closed his eyes and carefully analyzed, "Where are the Indian soldiers?" The guy realized that there was an ambush of enemy infantrymen near the cave very close to the trees. Ian noticed that there were about 20 battle points standing near the entrance to the cave. Soldier Liu excitedly shouted that he would try to get rid of the snipers. He asked that the protagonist help his brothers break out and escape. Ian explained that the snipers are a few meters high. They're not going to be easy to deal with. Soldier Liu asked the protagonist what the protagonist is offering him now. Yang told the man to go to the cave and wait. The protagonist decided to neutralize the snipers in turn. Enemy snipers were perched in a tree. They were looking through their scopes. The soldier said grudgingly to his colleague that they had been in the tree for hours and the Chinese still hadn't come out of the cave. Another soldier shouted to the Indian to keep quiet so as not to reveal their position. The soldier told his colleague not to be afraid, as reinforcements could not come through quickly. Suddenly there was a suspicious noise. The soldier drew his rifle and asked who was here. The fighters looked away and noticed a small animal running along the night road. The soldier said reassuringly that he had just seen an ordinary Chinese pangolin. Suddenly the soldiers heard something suspicious. One of them turned around and asked who was there. The protagonist appeared and introduced himself to the enemy soldiers with a mocking intonation. The Indian was scared because Chinese reinforcements had arrived. He started shooting. The protagonist rushed very quickly out of the tree to attack the soldiers. The guy took out one sniper with a swinging leg kick. The soldier couldn't hold on. He started falling down the tree. His colleague was scared. Indian soldiers, after hitting the protagonist, started falling from the tree from top to bottom. One of the falling soldiers screamed fearfully before collapsing to the ground. At that time, there were unexplained gunshots. From the side flew bullets at the protagonist. The protagonist said that his enemies have a pretty good reaction to the situation. Ian began to dodge the bullets flying at him very quickly and professionally. The protagonist then took out his poisoned needles and started throwing them at the Indians.